Good afternoon and welcome all. We are waiting for one of speaker to join and we will begin shortly.
Hello, I'm Binudev C. present.
Yes, hello, sir. Thank you for joining us. Yeah.
Shall we start? Yes, okay. Fine.
Good afternoon and welcome all to the Albertian Knowledge Summit of 2022 of Department of English of St. Albert's College Autonomous. We are discussing the topic Dalit Discourse, Reflections on Marginal Lives and Narratives. And once again, welcome you all to the afternoon session, and this is our main session. And thank you for joining to this meet today. Now let me introduce how we're going. Let me give you an outline of the afternoon session. The session is divided to two sessions. The session 1 is from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. And our main speaker for session 1 is Dr. Ajay S. Shekhar, Assistant Professor and Coordinator of Center for Buddhist Studies, SUS, Kaladi. And our session 2 is from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. It will be a talk by Mr. Vishnu Narayanan, Assistant Professor in English and Director of Center for English Language Teaching, Institute of English, University of Kerala, Thiruvananthapuram. Then from 4 p.m. to 3 p.m., we have a paper presentation which will be chaired by Dr. Vinu K. Devasi, Associate Professor of Government Law College, Thrissur. And so now, without wasting any time, I invite our student coordinators to introduce our speakers for the sessions. Now I invite an athlete Sajan of Department of English to introduce our speaker 1, Dr. Ajay S. Shekhar.
Our first chief speaker for today is Dr. Ajay S. Shekhar. He is the Assistant Professor of the Department of English at Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit, Kaladi. He has 10 years of regular service as Assistant Professor. He has also attained the Doctor of Philosophy from MG University, Kottayam. His doctoral thesis is on caste and gender margins represented in post-colonial Indian fiction written in English and other modern Indian languages. His area of research interests include post-colonial and subaltern studies, cultural studies, race and ethnicity studies, gender and caste studies. He was awarded Adya Devam Award in 2014, Sahodaran Sahitya Puraskaram in 2015, and Lord Buddha Universal Award in 2017. So it's a great pleasure to have you here with us today, sir.
Thank you, Anatolij. Now I welcome Nantana from Department of English to introduce our speaker 2, Mr. Vishnu Narayanan.
Our second guest speaker for today is Mr. Vishnu Narayanan, who is an assistant professor from the Institute of English, University of Kerala. He has completed his master's degree in English from Madras Christian College. He is currently doing his research at the Institute of English, University of Kerala, under the guidance of academician Dr. Meena T. Pillai. He had presented numerous papers and also delivered talks at various colleges across Kerala. We are privileged to have you amongst us, sir.
Thank you, Nandana. Now, this afternoon session is chaired by Dr. Binu KD. He's the Associate Professor of English, Government Law College, Thrissur, and Research Supervisor at St. Joseph's College, Devagiri, Kozhikode. He joined the Department Collegiate Education in 2014. He started his service at the Cochin College, Cochin in 2009, and later in 2010 he joined Sacred Heart College, Devara. In 2014, he shifted to government service. He took his master's from the Department of English, Pondicherry Central University in 1998. He was awarded PhD in Dalit Studies from Sri Shankara University, Kaladi in 2009. His research articles have been published by reputed publishing houses like Routledge. Now, I welcome Dr. Binu K. Debussy to chair this session, and I'm handing over this to you, sir.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
All right. HOD of English, St. Albert's College, Dr. Mary Sapna, distinguished resource persons of the day, Dr. Ajay Shekhar and Vishnu Narayanan, members, organizing members of this wonderful seminar on Dalit Discourses, student coordinators, teachers, and other participants of the seminar. Let me thank the person for saying the nice words about me, for introducing me. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to congratulate the Department of English, St. Albert's College, for organizing a seminar on Dalit Discourses as part of its academic event, Albertian Knowledge Summit 2022. I also congratulate the organizing committee for inviting the best resource persons for this seminar. Undoubtedly, Dr. Ajay Shekhar is the best scholar that anyone can think of for a seminar on Dalit Discourses. And of course, Dr. Ajay Shekhar is my friend. And I remember years back when I edited a book on Malayalam Dalit literature, he contributed an article. As you all know, Dr. Ajay has been publishing profusely in the field of Dalit studies, and his articles have appeared in almost all the leading literary journals in Malayalam, like Madhubhumi, Bhasha Poshni, Madhyamam, etc. And his present writings are particularly concerned with foregrounding the Dalit Bahujan history and literary and cultural traditions in Kerala. And his attempt to revive the Buddhist tradition of Kerala has to be seen from this angle. This I'm mentioning because this aspect of his scholarship has not been mentioned by the person who introduced him. I think this is a very important and valid point. And it is with this vision that he has founded the Center for Buddhist Studies in Sri Shankara University, Kaladi. And this epistemological effort on the part of Dr. Ajay Shekhar to rediscover the tradition of the Dalit Bahujans in Kerala, the history and cultural traditions, which have been so long suppressed and subjected to cultural oblivion, to cultural amnesia, I would say, is indeed a commendable work that he is doing for posterity. And of course, today, Dr. Ajay Shekhar, as you know, is going to speak on democratizing education and society, Dalit literature and pedagogy in Kerala. This is a very, very important point. This is a very important topic that he has selected, and it's a very needed subject today. And I think his talk is based on the premise that learning of Dalit literature will lead, study of Dalit literary works will lead to greater democratization of education system and Kerala society at large. And as I told you, this is a very pertinent topic to discuss in a seminar on Dalit discourses, because it directly relates to the very process that we are involved. See, now we are gathered on a virtual platform to deliberate on Dalit discourses as part of our pedagogical engagement. So the topic Dr. Ajay has selected prompts one to ask a self-probing question, whether this kind of academic endeavors are capable of democrating ourselves. And going beyond us, the question is whether teaching and learning of Dalit literature has any positive impact on our education system and thereby on the society at large. So this, as I said, is a very important question that we as teachers and students who deal with Dalit literature as part of our curriculum should indeed ponder over. And as you all know, today, Dalit literature has entered the canon of UG and PG curriculum of almost all the universities and colleges in Kerala. And, in that way, even Dalit literature has got at least token representation in the English literary canon too. But the pertinent question is, how do we deal with Dalit writings? This is such an important question. As a person who has taught Dalit literature at least for a dozen of years now, I think this is a very important question that we should address. So my question is it enough that we teach Dalit texts in the classroom the way we discuss some other texts, treating them as only literary artifacts? What I feel is that if we approach Dalit texts, separating them from their very social context and ignoring the politics that they seem to articulate, then we are sure to miss the point. So I think we should discuss a Dalit text, placing it against the reality it is grounded on, and also related to the reality outside the text, understanding the ways the dominating segments of our society retain their dominance and marginalize the subaltern classes in the process. So it's only then the teaching and learning of Dalit literature can have the desired effect. Collison Dalit literature, and thank you. Now let me invite Dr. Ajay Shekhar to handle his session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Binu Devasi, and also Dr. Sapna and other friends at St. Albert's College. And I'm indeed privileged and happy to be part of the Albertian Summit 2022. And also, I appreciate the topic of the session on Dalit Discourse. And I salute this gathering and the academic community, students and teachers there. Many friends have also joined. So once again, good afternoon to all of you. And today in the first session, we are discussing about democratizing education and society, the significance, the importance of Dalit literature, and also Dalit literature being included into the pedagogy in Kerala at various levels, as Dr. Binu has enlightened us just now. So this is a crucial issue in the present, as Dr. Binu has articulated, because our democracy, our modernity, our country at large, the republic at large, and the constitution, to be specific, we are facing severe threats to our democratic system and the education system, especially the higher education system in India, in particular in the context of the new policy reforms and the new frameworks that are introduced from a centralized kind of vantage in recent times. I'm obviously referring to the National Educational Policy, which was passed in 2020 and which is already into effect. And alarming kind of drastic kind of changes are being done to the philosophy and the vision and the practice of education from the elemental level to the higher education level. Already the research and higher education level at the universities are being affected. So it's high time that we critically rethink about these reformulations and the ways in which states like Kerala or Tamil Nadu, South India, or other parts, other margins of India can create a kind of critique and resistance towards these centralized and repressive and hegemonic kind of developments in the country. So this question of hegemony, the question of culture, the question of internal forms of imperialism are very pertinent issues in the present, when a lot of new forms of revivalist and communalist kind of polarizations and ultranationalisms and cultural forms of nationalisms are on the rise in the country. Intolerance is on the rise in the country. Violence is on the rise, and also alienation and othering and outcasting of the people, and even physical forms of violence, violent forms of suppression and subordination and exclusion, and even extermination of the people are happening in many parts of the country. So we need to address these issues and provide representative kind of selections and samplings and positions or spacing within the pedagogical framework. That's what we can do as academics, as teachers and students and researchers belonging to the knowledge community, academic community. We need to address these issues of the immediate past and the present, and also work towards saving the future and the posterity of this country and the world at large. So that's why we are into this democratization of education. So only through democratizing and reforming education that we can aspire for a better tomorrow and a better society. So in order to democratize society, we must first invest ourselves, our efforts and energies and inputs and intelligence into the processes of pedagogy and the practice of pedagogy and education at large. So that's why we are trying to reform, reformulate, and democratize and decenter the canonical systems of education, and the traditional practices so that we can be more inclusive, more decentered, more democratic, and more egalitarian, and more futuristic in that positive or emancipatory sense. So in order to, democratize education, we need to definitely go into the processes and philosophy of democracy, basically. So democracy, as we know, in the last 50 to 70 years of our experiment of India, the Indian constitutional democracy, and also if you look at the traditions of democracy in the West, it's nothing but a representational form of governance. The people are supposed to rule through their representatives. The people are electing or giving mandate to their representatives, and they are having the governance. So it's a form of a representative form of governance, and the process of social participation and inclusion and representation. Basically, representation is at the fundamentals of democracy. So our textbooks and pedagogy, our education system, our classroom teaching and learning, whether it is online or offline, or whether it is classroom dialogue-based, or whether it is research-oriented, whatever it is, what all methodologies that we are following pedagogy, it must be based on the fundamental process and philosophy of representation. So democracy as the politics of representation, democracy as the governance of the people by themselves through the acts of representation, democracy as inclusive, and democracy as pluralistic, democracy as a politics of representation and that of dissent, and the space for the minor and the marginalia. That is supposed to be the key paradigm, the ground of reality on which the institutions of democracy are founded, or it is supposed to be founded, at least. So through the practice of education, we are supposed to inculcate this basic literacy of democracy, that democracy is a representative form of governance of the people, and social inclusion and social participation and social representation is the base of democracy. So that's the fundamental democratic value, the values of modern democratic values of liberty, equality, and fraternity can be achieved only through a representative form of governance and a representation, especially social and political representation of the people that is required, and social justice and social representation are at the foundations of democracy. These are the basic processes and practices and philosophy of democracy. So that's the premise from where we are talking about opening up the canon of education, the textbooks and the prescribed texts and the syllabi. It must reflect the diversity of the society. It must include the alienated and the marginalized and the excluded people, especially at the periphery and at the bottom of things in our society. Only when the people at the bottom find their voices and agency within the classroom or within the pedagogical framework or within the university system, not just as students or administrators, but as teachers and professors and academics and media persons of our society. Only at that moment our democracy will be valid, or will be a living and healthy kind of democracy. So that kind of inclusiveness, that kind of representational transparency, that kind of ensuring adequate, sustained ensuring of various social sections, especially those who are alienated and those who are cut off from the mainstream because of the age-old shackles of varna or caste or gender and other forms of hierarchies and inequalities in traditional societies like India. We need to address all those socio-cultural factors and then try to rework and provide adequate, sufficient social representation and inclusion, and strengthen the processes and institutions and practices of democracy in the country. So, in that sense, in India, historic marginalization, gross forms of exclusion, social exclusion, and othering have happened. The Dalit Bahujans, as mentioned by Dr. Binu earlier, the Dalit Bahujans and the minorities and the women and many other contested groups like the sexual minorities also in India. They were alienated and otherized and dehumanized and demonized and annihilated on many grounds from many frontiers of knowledge and representation and forms of political power and governance in India. Not to mention about the problems of gross kind of exclusions in the field of academia, media, and many other cultural kind of institutions and processes in India. So these people, the multitudes of India, especially the Dalit Mahajans and the minorities and women of India, and the sexual minorities, the LGBTQI people, they are the wronged people of India. They are not given their adequate shares in power. Their representation is minimal and dismal, and it is not at all. They are underrepresented in every walks of life, in every field of education or public instruction, or in public service, or in media, or in higher academia in particular, higher education, the university and college level in particular. They're grossly underrepresented. And also that meager kind of representation that they are getting through affirmative action and other policies of the state are now being threatened and sabotaged through various, say, myopic and short-sighted over-representational strategies like that of the economic reservation that was passed in Kerala in 2018 through some under the pressure tactics and the context of, say, most barbaric kind of backlashes and counter-revolutions like the so-called Namajaba Koshayatra and Shuddhalala that happened in 2018. So it was passed through the legislative of Kerala, something that is against the social inclusion and representation and the social justice paradigm of the Constitution of India. Even today, some 20 to 30 cases are pending in the Supreme Court of India against that recent kind of amendment, which is anti-constitutional, which is against any form of statistical data on representation in India or in Kerala. So this kind of counter-revolutions, regressions into primitive forms of pre-modern kind of barbarism and jingoism and cultural nationalisms and fanatic kind of communal violence and bloodshed, intolerance of the other, otherizing and demonizing of the minorities in particular. These have become the everyday reality of India, unfortunately. So why is this happening? Why this kind of totalitarian communal agendas are winning? Why the democratic constitution is made into a mockery? Why the democratic setup is made into a mockery, and this kind of ultra-nationalist, jingoistic forces are coming to power? This is a question that academics and people who are dealing with culture in our society, we must address this pertinent issue. So this was addressed in the classical fascist context by Antonio Gramsci himself. We know about his idea of hegemony and how the consensual rule is being created through a kind of intervention in culture. So Gramsci was the first to move away from the economic old paradigm of economic determinism, the base and superstructure Marxism, and to think about the socio-cultural and political ramifications and underpinnings of this kind of totalitarian regimes, and why fascism is gaining ground among the masses and the people. Even the victims are part of it. It is a complicit consensual rule, find Gramsci. So, according to him, these socio-cultural issues are being neglected. And the totalitarian forces of cultural nationalism, they are indulging and they are playing with the cultural dimensions of society into traditional culture, the imagery, the symbolism, the narratives of the dominant culture or the elitist culture are being misused by the forces of totalitarianism and over-representation in order to mobilize the masses. They manipulate socio-cultural traditions and practices of the masses and manipulate them and make a kind of a vote bank of them. So that's how Antonio Gramsci has tried to analyze the question of classical fascism in Italy, in Italian society, in relation to the peasant question in Italy, the Italian peasantry, the subaltern, as he termed them. So in the context of India, later, or slightly later, that was in the 30s and 40s, classical fascism of Europe, of Germany and Italy. Perhaps during the same time, in the 30s and 40s, in India, the internal imperial issue was addressed by intellectuals like Ambedkar. And Ambedkar was the first educated intellectual, academically trained intellectual, having multiple research degrees from the West, from Columbia and London and all. So he was the first to analyze the socio-cultural and political dimensions of inequality in the country. So he was the first one to address the context of caste or the historic exclusions and hierarchies created by caste. He called it the graded inequality in India, which is caused by the dominant form of religion here. So he was the first one to analyze the superstructural element, the cultural, superstructural or ideological aspect of religion in India. And he identified the dominant form of religion, that is Hindu Brahmanism, is a form of oppression for the masses. And it is not simply there, and it hasn't invented caste on its own. Caste has a genealogy, and it is the product of this competition between religions in India, the conflicts between an egalitarian ethical religion like Buddhism and the aristocratic, elitist and exclusivist hierarchical religion, the dominant one, the violent and the more aggressive totalitarian one called Hinduism or Brahmanism, or Hindu Vedic, Vedantic, Sanatana Brahmanism as such. So caste is the creation of a religious persecution, a religious struggle, and conquest and persecution, explained Ambedkar. That is the most important and valid kind of theorization of caste. Many scholars from the West and East and from India and outside, they have been studying caste from ancient times, and especially in the context of imperialism here, European intervention, the Orientalist scholars and Indologists, they were looking into the questions of caste. Many studied it before Ambedkar, and many studied after him. Even recently, Nicholas Dix or Susan Bailey or Louis Dumont, for example. Louis Dumont, M.N. Srinivasan from India also. So many people from inside and outside India, before and after Ambedkar, they have studied and analyzed the caste system, which is the root cause of this untouchability and this created inequality and the problem of the Dalit Bahujan and women issue in India. So many have studied, but Ambedkar's theorization and insight into the origin and development of caste and the consolidation of the caste and Varna system, Varnashrama Dharma, as it is called, or the caste system in simple English, as it is called. It's a Portuguese word, caste. And it's used in most of the European languages. So anyway, Ambedkar's theorization of caste system is the most rational and most sustained one since the 1930s and 40s. So in 40s, he wrote these inevitable books of Indian society and cultural history. Who were the untouchables? How this untouchability came into practice? What are the reasons for it? What are the contexts and who created it? It's not at all created by the people themselves. Nobody would like to be an outcast or an untouchable or a subaltern. So who has created and coined and consolidated this thing? So this question, the most pertinent question, the most significant question, even today, in the case of India and the Indian diasporas, wherever they have traveled, whether to the United States or Canada or Australia, they have taken along with them the shackles of this bondage called caste. They are castes, like the racism of the West, casteism of the Indian origin people and even diasporic people. It's the most infamous thing in the world. So Ambedkar was the first to ask these very important, significant, lasting questions of Indian society and culture and politics. And he provided the answer also, especially in the books like Who Are the Untouchables? Why They Became So. In the 40s, he composed it and published it towards the mid part of the 1940s. In 46 to 47, he was publishing these books. Who were the untouchables? Why they became so? And who were the Shudras? And how they became the fourth Varna of the Indo-Aryan society. These questions were asked and provided a rational historic and sociological explanation by Ambedkar. So it's the confrontation of the religions, and especially the dominant one, the priestocratic and patriarchal religion, the priestocratic patriarchy, the priestly militia nexus of that religion, that has punished the other, the egalitarian one, Buddhism, because the people were not submitting to this Brahmanical patriarchy. They were holding on to their egalitarian Buddhist practices from the time of the Buddha, and at least from the time of the Ashoka in South India and Ceylon and many parts of South Asia. Ashoka's own daughter and son, the Mahinda and Sangamita, they have taken this new gospel of the Buddha to various parts of South Asia and South India and Ceylon and various parts of the world. So the people were reluctant to leave that egalitarian tradition. They were holding on to the Buddhist egalitarian ethical traditions. They never submitted to the priestly militia combined and patriarchal forms of priestocracy, which is briefly called Brahmanical patriarchy by the Indian feminists, Uma Chakravarti, Rajeshwari Sundararajan to Sharmila Rage and Anupama Rao. They have all extended it from Ambedkar himself. Sharmila Rage's own last work, which is called Against the Madness of Manu. B.R. Ambedkar on Brahmanical patriarchy says it all. So it's basically from Ambedkar that the Indian feminists and the Dalit Bahujan feminists of India today, Anupama Rao or Abhinaya Ramesh or Sharmila Rage, they have adopted and recovered this critical concept of Brahmanical patriarchy. So Brahmanical patriarchy punished the people for not submitting to it and not leaving the ethical and egalitarian practices, the democratic dimensions, that of liberty, equality, fraternity. Ambedkar himself proclaimed it in his BBC talks and his last speeches, that I'm taking the liberty, equality, fraternity, not just from the French Revolution and the European model of modernity, but from the ancient modernity of rootedness, the Prabhuta concept of the Buddha and his Sanghas. From there I am drawing it. Ambedkar has declared it. So Ambedkar defined this as the root cause of the caste system, untouchability, and caste was a punishment that was given by Brahmanical patriarchy to the people who were reluctant to submit before the Brahmanical patriarchy. It was a punishment. It was a religious persecution. So caste is also having a religious persecution dimension to it. So Dalit literature or Dalit kind of writing and philosophy and Dalitism and Dalitology and Dalit literatures of various kinds flourished from, in modern times, it flourished from Ambedkar's own writings. And 22 volumes he has written in English language. Fortunately, we are having it in English, and that's why it's now becoming part of the world kind of legacy and democratic culture. People in Europe, they have embraced the philosophy and the political form of Buddhism that was reinterpreted by Ambedkar as Navayana, or the new form of political Buddhism. Even the people of Europe, the outcasts of Europe, like the Roma or the Romani, the untouchables of Europe, and the untouchables of Mayana countries like Japan, the Burakumin of Japan, they are embracing the philosophy and the political praxis of Ambedkar, the democratic politics of cultural difference. That's the significance of Dalit literature as well. So it's a literature of enlightenment. Both the West and the East, the ancient form of the Buddhist legacy, that is the gospel of the Buddha for equality, samta and karuna, compassion and maitri, greater kind of fraternity and liberty and equality, samta, karuna and maitri. These are very much part of that that canon, the new emerging canon, the decentering kind of canon of Dalit literature. So it's a literature of democracy. It's a literature of enlightenment. It's a literature of modernity, as it involves both the Asian and Indian traditions and also the traditions of the world, including the Enlightenment modernity of Europe. Because Ambedkar was trained there in Western metaphysics and philosophy and sociology and economics, modern sciences like economics as well. He's having PhDs in economics. So this kind of an international, multicultural, cosmopolitan dimension is at the heart of the Dalit literary and philosophical paradigm. So that's why it's a truly cosmopolitan, international, and contemporary, and democratic and modern kind of epistemology, which can counter and rectify the problems of this elitist, exclusivist, jingoistic cultural nationalism, or the pro-fascist kind of tendencies in India. Only this can critique, only an epistemology that is based in the egalitarianism, the samta and karuna of the Buddha, which is taught by all the social reformers, Mahatma Phule to Pandit Ayodhya to Narayana Guru, to Saudharan, to Yelapachan, to Mahatma Iyengali, to all those E.V. Ramaswamy Naikar later, all of them were grounding on this paradigm of justice and equality and fraternity at large. Guru in Kerala, for example, he was talking about Anugamba and the compassion and the compassionate paradigm of the Buddha, Jesus, and the Prophet in particular. He pays homage to these three stalwarts as teachers of humanity, great masters of humanity. So the compassionate paradigm makes Dalit literature something that is more lasting and more futuristic. Only that can the unconditional love that is taught by Jesus as God as love, fraternity as God by the prophet, and Anukampa or Karuna, Mahakaruna and Mahamaitri of the Buddha. So that kind of values, the quintessential values of humanity, whatever humanity has achieved over this 5 or 6 millennia. So that is being enshrined in the Ambedkarite paradigm of Dalit literature. So only this can address the issues of hate and otherizing and demonizing and violent forms of exclusion and othering. So therefore, we need to think of more and more texts from the Dalit literary kind of traditions into the syllabi, especially from the lower classes to the higher classes, and to the university and research kind of practices. And also we need to look into the other alternative traditions of religion, traditions of women, traditions of outcasts, traditions of other forms of articulations, that of the sexual minorities and other disenfranchised and outcasted people, alienated sections of the society. And also we need to listen to the university at large, the ecology at large, the forgotten and the wronged elements of our universe. We need to take into consideration, and we need to include more and more representative agencies and speeches and articulations into the purview of pedagogy, so that it becomes more comprehensive and egalitarian and much more balanced, and representative texts must be included. That should be the mantra of our pedagogy, like Saudharan talking about Ambedkar as a mantra in 1940s, towards the end of the 1940s, when Ambedkar was made the architect. When he was invited to become the chairman of the drafting committee of the Indian Constitution. It was Saudharan Ayyappan in Kerala, in Kochi. He introduced Ambedkar to the Keralite Malayalam reading public through his poetry, that Ambedkar is a Sharana mantra. Ambedkar, your name would be chanted as a Sharana mantra by the people of future India, as a Sharana mantra of Buddhism. Ambedkar എന്ന തന്നാമ ചതുരക്ഷരി മന്ത്രമായി ജപിക്കും നന്ദി തിങ്ങുന്ന ഹൃത്തഴും ഭാവി ഭാരതം. That's what the future India would chant you as a Sharana mantra of Buddhism. That was the prophetic statement in 1940s, towards the end of the 1940s. Saudharan Ayyappan has written and published a poem called Caste India. It's a critique of this casteist hegemonic Brahmanical patriarchy of India, and it's a salutation to the neo Buddha. We have the Nanamonam, that was our initiation line in the ancient system of Vilakkathirikal and Eluthiniruthu. Nanamonam means salutations to Shakti Janamuni, the Buddha. So likewise, Saudharan was saluting Ambedkar when he was invited to be the chairman of the drafting committee of our constitution. So let us strengthen the constitution. Let us recover the lost egalitarian legacies and the social justice paradigm and the representation, social representation, foundation of democracy in India and also everywhere, in Kerala, in India, everywhere. It is the need of the hour. It is the urgent need of the academia and media and all those who are into public action and people's matters. We need to work hard towards this kind of a renewed interest in democratic values, and only through democratizing our education, only through refashioning and making it more inclusive and representative, we can sustain this pedagogical paradigm and also sustain the democratic dimension of our larger society. So I hope we will rise up to the challenge, and we will rethink about our mistakes and slips, and let us hope for a better tomorrow. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Since time is limited and the next speaker is waiting, and also I'm eager to listen to the responses of the audience and friends. So therefore, I would conclude here with his initial remarks. And once again, my best regards to all. And also, we must remember Professor Ijaz Ahmad, the great Indian and Pakistani critic, Marxist critic, who passed away yesterday, last night. So we pay homage to Professor Ijaz Ahmad, Professor Bell Hooks, who passed away recently, and many other people who are trying to address the issue of caste in India, and who are into Dalit literature and education, like Professor Gail Ahmed herself. We lost many serious crusaders against caste recently, caste and race and patriarchal kind of forces. We salute them all, and let me conclude here to listen to you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ajay Shegar, for your erudite talk on the need for democratizing our society through education and the role of Dalit literature and pedagogy in the process. So again, for want of time, I shall reserve my comments on your talk, and rather I will give space to the audience, because I know that this is such a rare opportunity that participants have got to interact with such a scholarly person like Dr. Ajay Shegar. So, and moreover, we have one more session by Mr. Vishnu Narayanan. So now the platform is open for discussion. So if you have any questions to Dr. Ajay Shegar, if you want, you can clarify your doubts. You can, of course, make your observations as well. Okay. Now it's open for discussion. I'm sorry, I lost my connection and I was left. So, some problem with my net connection. Yes. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are there any questions to Dr. Ajay Shegar? if you have anything to ask him, you can ask him now, or we shall move on to the next session. Hello, Dr. Ajay, are you there?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. Just to give a start, I have a very simple, sometimes rather silly question to ask you. As a teacher, I have been teaching Dalit literature for a dozen of years now, and I think there's something, some serious defect with the way we approach Dalit literature. And what I feel is, I can just give you examples. When I ask my students, after offering a course on Dalit writings, when I ask for their reactions, most of them say it's so shocking, it's depressing, and oh, poor Dalits, etc., etc. When you later ask them for their comments on, for example, on reservation for Dalits and other eligible communities, or if you ask about the Mandal Commission report, etc., they come out, I've seen that they're opposing it with tooth and nail. They're very vociferous speaking against it. So this is something which I have observed. Do you consider this as a failure of pedagogy? It's a failure of articulation from the part of we teachers, or is it something, some problem with the methodology that we adopt? So since you are also, would have observed this, I just want your comments. Okay, so how do you?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Binu, for that very significant and relevant question in the present, especially in day-to-day teaching and classroom pedagogy. So this is this shock, this immediate shock, or this kind of uneasiness with the experience of the margin. It is something natural, because the privileged sections, they cannot even think of that, or they are very carefully, or we have that tendency to avoid something that is shocking or startling, or that may destabilize the equilibrium or the status quo. So the status quo forces would never accept the severity of exclusion and the immensity of inequality. So only those who are experiencing it, or those who are into similar forms of exclusion and othering, like the women, or sexual minorities, or excluded minority communities, only they can understand the kind of pangs and pains and the need for inclusion, or the need for a space for agency and voice, and the need for this representation. So the politics of representation, or the literacy regarding representation, or the literacy of democracy, that democracy can only function through various forms of contesting and conflicting kind of agencies coming together, or being represented in in the arena of the nation or the world at large. So that basic literacy and philosophy of inclusion and representation and participatory social democracy must be given from childhood onwards. That is lacking. That's why we have this shock or aftershock later. Only now at the undergraduate level in BA or MA or PG classes we are teaching it. So this must be introduced from the beginning. Poigil Apachan, for example, the songs and spirituals of Apachan, the political verses of Sahodaran, The anti-caste verses of Mulur and Pandit Karupan must be introduced from the beginning itself. The philosophical verses of humanism and secularism and Anugamba of the Guru must be taught from the basis. And Buddha's teaching, Jesus on love, and Prophet on fraternity, all these compassionate teachings of the great teachers of humanity must be introduced from the beginning. And democracy as a representative form of governance, as a modern form which is based on social representation and inclusion, that philosophy, that way of life, that's what Ambedkar has also reminded us, because democracy cannot thrive on a heap of cow dung. In a varnashrama dharma society, in a caste society, it is very difficult to cultivate it. It comes only when fraternity, sahodaryam, this maitri at large is there. So it's very difficult to nurture maitri on an advanced stage. So it's easier for children to pick up. So if it is introduced, this karuna and maitri and sahodarya, fraternity at large is introduced from the beginning, and processes of democracy. Like Ambedkar talking about, I'm taking liberty, equality, fraternity, the modern democratic values from the Buddha and his Dharma, and from the Tipitaka, from the Vinaya Pitaka, and the rules of democracy that are codified and written down in the Vinaya Pitaka that I am taking. So that kind of democratic training and education, and the basic literacy that democracy is nothing but social inclusion and representation must be given from the beginning. So that's why I stressed on the importance of representation and checking over representation and totalitarianism at all levels, and also providing sufficient representation to the underrepresented social sections and groups in society from the very beginning, from the elemental basic education paradigm to the university level, to the parliament, from panchayat to parliament, from the kindergarten, from the Sanganwadis to the university. That kind of social diversification and inclusion and representation must be nurtured, and it must be nurtured as a way of life. That's what Ambedkar also taught us. It is a culture, he said. Democracy is not just a political ruling system, it's a culture. Only through fraternity, only through this maitri, it can be developed. So we need to inculcate those values as a practice of life, not just as a philosophy of life, but as a life practice itself from the beginning. Then they would be more sensitive to the problems of the other. They may be able to listen to the other, and they would also like to share their pies of power with the disenfranchised and the alienated people. Thank you very much for that question.
Thank you, Dr. Ajay Shekhar, for your very enlightening answer. If there are any queries, please present your questions. And if no, we will move on to the next session for want of time. If you want, you can also put your questions in the chat box, or you can even later send your questions to Dr. Ajay Shekhar.
Sir, my name is Vinay. Yes, I come from the SS College, Putota. Sir, I have a question about that. Like Dalit, we have seen that transgenders are also facing the same problem. Like they are just used for only sexual, and they are oppressed by society. How can we overcome their problems also?
Yes, thank you, Vinay, for that very contemporary, valid kind of question and a real problem in Kerala today. So now we have an increasing number of transgender students in our campuses, and still they are facing severe forms of othering and exclusion. So again, from the basic level of education, from the schools onwards, we must try to inculcate this egalitarian practice of seeing different sexualities on an equal footing. So the issues of the transgender people, the issues of the sexual minorities must also be there in our education, in civics and politics, and also in sociology and all the social sciences that we are teaching from the school level onwards, and also the life narratives. Literature also we can do, as we are including the life narratives and autobiographies of Dalits and Dalit women in the syllabus. We also need to include the narratives of the transsexuals and the LGBTQI people in the syllabus. So including more representative texts of the sexual minorities, we will definitely, now we have those now.
I just want to narrate an experience that I had during my academic career. So some years back, when I was working in a college, in a government college affiliated to the Calicut University, we have the Dalit studies as one of the electives for our PG program, MA English program. And Dalit studies was our elective. And 2 years later, I was transferred to another college. And then some years, later, I got a retransfer to the first college. And then when I came back, Dalit studies was no more there. So when I asked one of the faculty members about this, that elite lady's casual remark was, what is the use of Dalit literature for our students? After all, it's mere experience narration. So this is what she told me, and I'm not surprised at her remark. Indeed, she was airing the opinion held by even academics about Dalit literature in general and Dalit life writings in particular. So the general perception is that Dalit literature or Dalit life writing is merely an expression of the subjective experiences of the writer, and it is devoid of any political content and literary sophistication. So it is in this context, I think Mr. Vishnu Narayanan's talk on the politics of Dalit life writings becomes pertinent. So, but I wish that Mr. Vishnu Narayanan had included the word aesthetics also as part of the title. And I know that he is the person best qualified to talk about Dalit politics and the politics and aesthetics of Dalit literature, because he has a book on Dalit art and aesthetics to his credit. But perhaps Mr. Vishnu is right in his choice of the title, because in the context of Dalit literature, one cannot speak about politics and aesthetics separately, since the aesthetics of Dalit writings is also part of its politics. So, my view is that it is not that Dalit literature is without any ideological foundations. Many people don't know that. Dalit writers are indeed driven by Ambedkarite ideology, as Dr. Ajay Shekhar was emphasizing in his talk, the importance of the Ambedkar's analysis of caste system. Of course, as Ajay mentioned in his previous session, although many people, very scholarly people, they are indeed, like Srinivasan and many others, the Orientalists, they have studied the case of Varna system or caste system. Dr. Ambedkar's analysis of caste system remains unique because Dr. Ambedkar has not only explored the mechanisms, origin, and development of caste system, but he was also very radical in there is a tendency to read Dalit writings politically, treating them as mere experience narration. So I think it is in this particular context of the teaching and learning of Dalit literature politically, without relating it to the social aspect that Dr. Vishnu Narayanan's talk on the politics of Dalit life writings becomes significant. So I invite Mr. Vishnu Narayanan for this session. Thank you. Over to Mr. Vishnu Narayanan.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, one and all. Thank you, Dr. Binu, for the introduction. I would also like to thank the department and the organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak in the Albertian Knowledge Summit. Thank you for that. So I hope I'm audible. Feel free to interrupt if there is an issue with the sound or the clarity. If there is any net issues, just feel free to interrupt. So let's move on to the paper. The Politics of Dalit Life Writings is my paper. And I won't be reading it out completely. I'll be directly interacting, and I'll be reading out the paper in between. Okay. So the paper is divided into 3 parts. The introductory part, I'll be talking about the life writings, the terms, the life writings in general, and why we need a new critical orientation in analyzing the life writing. So that will be the introductory part. And then the second part will be on Dalit life writings as alternative histories, or the articulation of the marginalized life, how it constitutes towards alternative histories. And the third part, the final part, will be on the translatability or the untranslatability of Dalit life writings. So let's move on to the paper. The politics of Dalit life writings. By politics here, I mean the principles relating or inherent to the topic, the sphere that I am talking about, which is Dalit life writings. And I have used the term Dalit life writings instead of autobiographies because, it's obvious. I'll be talking about autobiographies, but I use the umbrella term, life writings, because, life writing is an inclusive term that covers a wide range of personal narratives that include autobiography, collective biography, memoir, testimonials, diary writing, case histories, etc. So, and when we talk about autobiographical writing, Dalit literature is predominantly confessional in nature. I'm not talking about autobiographies as such. I'm talking about Dalit literature in general. We have the confessional tone, be it prose, be it poetry, be it drama. We can feel the confessional tone in Dalit literature in general. And obviously, in Dalit autobiographies, we know it's non-fictional in nature. And when we talk about Dalit autobiographies, we have oral autobiographies, we have narrated autobiographies, because we have the issue of illiteracy, and not all the autobiographies written by Dalit people, they are not written by themselves. Even though by definition, when we talk about autobiography, it's written by the self, isn't it? But in case of Dalit autobiographies, we have narrated autobiographies. For example, we have it in Malayalam, Kandal Kadagal Kadele Ende Jeevitham, or Ende Jeevitham, the 2 autobiographies written by Pokkudan. It's actually narrated, it was recorded by his son. And we have other examples. We have examples, the autobiography, Mully's autobiography is recorded by the English writer, James Freeman. We have Tamil Dalit autobiography. We have Veerama's autobiography. We have Veerama is a folk dancer, folk singer. Her autobiography is also narrated. It was actually recorded by a French lady, Josiane Racine, and it was initially published in France. It's really interesting. We have a Tamil Dalit lady's autobiography being recorded in first person by a French lady. It was published in 1995 in French, and later, after 2 years, it was translated into English by Will Hobson. So, when we talk about autobiographies, that's why, I use the umbrella term life writings because, it covers a lot of other variants in Dalit writing. And also testimonials or testimonial writing. There's a difference between, we have memoirs, we have autobiographies, we have testimonials. For example, the autobiography by Anne Frank, it's considered as testimonial because it is written with a purpose. This is actually common to almost all Dalit autobiographies because it's purpose driven. The Dalit writers are trying to prove something through their autobiographies. That's why Dalit autobiographies are more or less testimonial autobiographies. It's written with a purpose to prove a point, to showcase the atrocities or expose the atrocities that have been happening to the community or the person. So and when we look at autobiographical writing or like life writing in Indian literature, life writing took off in the second half of the 19th century. Pre-independence autobiographies are mostly concerned with the issues of struggles of independence. For example, we have a short account of my public self by Abdul Latif Khan, A Nation Making by Surendranath Banerjee, and the most popular, My Experiments with Truth by Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru's autobiography, An Autobiography. Okay, so we have a number of autobiographies, and I will start with the quote: "The emergence of the self in an autobiography is the making of an author." The emergence of the self in an autobiography is the making of the author. When we talk about mainstream autobiographies in India, we have, for example, let's take the autobiography by Mahatma Gandhi. There are a lot of incidents that happened in his life, and he chose certain incidents. He chose certain incidents in his life that better narrate the ideology that he's trying to convey through his work. This is common to most of the autobiographies, mainstream autobiographies that we have. We have an ideology, or we have in simple terms a theme that they try to convey through the autobiographies. We have the idea of, say, ahimsa, or like in the title itself says, the politics of it, the truth, the ideas of truth. I mean, think about the incidents that happens in one's life. There are a number of incidents, and we cannot narrate, we cannot record each and everything that happens in one's life in an autobiography. And there is a selection. There is a selection of certain incidents that better fit into the framework to convey an ideology. For example, another example is an autobiography. Jawaharlal Nehru's autobiography, it's titled An Autobiography. In this particular work, we don't have anything related to his personal life. We don't know his relationship with his daughter or with anybody. He's not talking about his personal life in his autobiography, but he's talking about the nation, his political career. Basically, it's completely political. So the theme or the ideology that the autobiographer trying to convey in the autobiography is different. So we have this theme-based autobiographies. Nirasti Chaudhary's autobiography, an autobiography of an unknown Indian. Again, we have a mixture of this personal self and public self. So there are certain ideologies that the autobiographers who are trying to convey through their autobiographies in the mainstream autobiography. This is common. And that's why writing an autobiography is a political act. When I say political act, I mean, there is a choice. Out of the number of experiences that the autobiographer has, he or she make a conscious choice of what all things that I am going to explain or record in my autobiography. So that's why it's a political choice. And again, generally autobiographies are records of success stories, or there is a kind of self-glorification in autobiographies. And this is the space where Dalit autobiographies differs a lot. Dalit autobiographies are entirely different in this particular viewpoint because we don't have self-glorifications. We have expressions of pain, expressions of suffering. The atrocities that happen to their community or the person are being explained or expressed. Or more importantly, exposed. Even when you talk about the aesthetics regarding Dalit literature, it's not the aesthetics that we see in the general literature or the mainstream literature that we have. Even in Dalit poetry, we don't have, say, the spontaneous overflow of powerful emotion because it's not expressing. They are more likely exposing the atrocities that have been happening to the Dalit community in totality. The core of Dalit literature is communal sentiment, and it discusses their paths of life, a viewpoint of life, the meaning of life, where their aesthetics convey diverse meanings, and every act revolves around the lives and spirits of living. The aesthetic of painful truth is discussed in Dalit literature, which deconstructs the traditional concept of aesthetic. The important phenomena of Dalit literature are all about the public exposure of their self and collective trauma. So we have the public exposure of their self and collective trauma in Dalit autobiographies. They are not success stories. They are not self-glorification. So that's why, I pointed out that we need a different kind of orientation. It cannot be analyzed or evaluated based on the criteria of evaluating the mainstream autobiographies. So that's actually the introductory note from where I start my particular paper. Okay, so moving on to the next prominent area. Dalit life writings or the articulation of the marginalized lives as alternate histories. So if you are looking at the critical studies of autobiographies, it has pressed on several issues. Out of the many, some of the broad areas which are in focus here are autobiographical expression as a source of truth. Again, autobiography as valuable historical source, invention of literary structure, autobiography as a source of historical investigation, study of psychological development through autobiography, reading gender through autobiography, reading of subaltern experiences through autobiography. These are actually the critical areas in autobiographies that we have. And in Dalit autobiography, this is really significant because it's the general idea that, when we talk about Dalit autobiographies, they are more or less community manifestos, or we have ethnographic account of this particular community. So if you're looking at Dalit autobiographies, it's not the story of one individual, of a single person. It's actually the story of the community and the story, the customs, the practices that they had in the community, the ethnographic details of the community, which were never recorded earlier. As Albertian rightly said, Ari Kananilo Rakshadum Enjadi Pati, rightly sung, his songs, Albertian songs. No alphabet in sight about my race. There are histories about other races. No alphabet in sight about my race. There are histories about other races. So this is how he starts his songs, Albertian the Particle. And, this is actually the title of the anthology by Susi Tharu and Satyanarayana, where we have the anthologies of Dalit writing from Malayalam and Tamil. No alphabet in sight is actually the title because that's actually what they are trying to foreground. We never had histories. We never had anthropology. We never had ethnographic accounts of Dalit communities. But there were histories about other communities, all other communities. So Dalit autobiographies, they kind of play a part where they can be considered as ethnographic accounts. For example, the autobiography by Bama is actually the story of the Paraya community. Okay, autobiography by Limpale, it's actually the story of the history of the ethnographic account of the Mahar community. The autobiography by the Punjabi writer Balbir Madhopuri, it's actually the story of the Chohra community. We have autobiographies by different writers from different states, and they actually represent the community. It's not the individual I, but the collective we that we are talking about. It's very interesting to note that the autobiography by Bama, Tarik, in this particular autobiography, she never uses the term I. Instead, she always uses the term we. Because throughout the autobiography, she is not talking about her individual personal experience alone. No, she's actually talking about the collective experience of her Dalit community, the pariah community that she lives in. So the problems, and we have a lot of information. That's why I said community manifestos. We have a lot of information about their work culture, their customs, the practices that they have, their household, like, how it operates, about their land, about their workforce, the timings, a lot of information. So basically, Dalit autobiographies are community manifestos. But in this particular paper, I would like to add on to something else, how they became alternative histories. For that, I will be taking the example of one Bengali autobiography, the first Bengali autobiography, Bengali Dalit autobiography, Interrogating My Chandal Life, autobiography of a Dalit by Manoranjan Byavari. This is actually the first Dalit autobiography from Bengal. And this particular autobiography gives us an alternative historically, it could be considered as an alternative historical document. Okay, moving on to the autobiographical account. Yeah, it's interesting to note Manoranjan Byabari's treatment of history and how it differs from the mainstream narratives of the partition of India. We are talking about the 1947 partition of Bengal. We are talking about the partition of the West Bengal and East Bengal, which is now Bangladesh. And we have an account. And it's really interesting to note that we have other two non-fiction narratives. One is by Barney White's Furner, Partition, the story of Indian independence and the creation of Pakistan in 1947. This is one account. And the second one is The Great Partition by Yasmin Khan. It's quite interesting that we have these two mainstream non-fictional narratives about the 1947 partition. But we have a lot of information in Manoranjan Byabari's Life of a Chandal regarding this particular incident, the partition and the aftermath. We have a 30-year-long, depiction, what really happened. Not just, regarding the partition, but after the partition, the refugee situation and the Marijapi massacre that happened. So, we have this document. It's actually a very significant historical document that we have now. Okay. So coming to the paper, the people who migrated from East Bengal at the time of partition became refugees in their own country, deprived of constitutional rights. Byabari details how the people protested against the ruling class. Their protest against the government and its policies and rules to survive in their land were met with violent, oppressive measures from the government. The violent bloodshed and massacres were the results of the government measures to suppress the attempts of the refugees to reclaim their land. The mainstream narratives on the partition, which I explained earlier, the two mainstream narratives on the partition and the aftermath are conveniently blinded towards this bloodshed and violence. It's really surprising to note that we don't have documents, details about this bloodshed and even the Marijapi massacre in those two mainstream narratives. This is where Interrogating My Chandal Life, an autobiography of a Dalit, gains significance as the autobiographical expression becomes the source of truth and that unfolds the untold story of the partition of Bengal. If we are looking at, we have the Dandakarnya project, like rehabilitation project, and later the Marijapi incident that happened in 1974. The mainstream narratives conveniently forget this incident because it is not a rehabilitation place. Historical accounts never mentioned the place. I'm talking about Marijapi, while describing the refugees of Bengal. By order of the then Chief Minister of West Bengal, a group of police entered the island and brutally attacked thousands of innocent people. They aimed to uproot the refugees from the land. The brutality of the government is not discussed in any historical narratives. I will give a quotation from the text. I quote, "Thousands of half-starved, unarmed people were beaten, raped, murdered. It is said that the people were shit boiled, piled on the boats, and then dumped in mid-sea and in the depths of the jungles. Some surmise that it is at this time that the Sundarban tigers grew used to human flesh, turning man-eaters. The carnage continued for from 31 January to 8 May, a long span of over 3 months, while the conscience of the awakened Bengal swept. Okay, the remaining refugees returned to Dandakaranya as per the order of the government. They were utterly broken in spirit and body. These ruminated, decayed-bodied Bengal refugees were made silent in the historical documents. This is why I said I will be talking about like how Dalit autobiographies becomes alternative histories. There is not even one single mention of Marijapi massacre in the major mainstream historical documents. White ends his final chapter by saying that East Bengal at last has a happier ending to date than it had in birth. From here, it is visible that how the mainstream historical documents approach these issues and how it is deliberately avoided the truth on political grounds. When we refer to the after effects of partition, we only look into the migration of the people and the violence that happened in India and Pakistan in the name of religion. And we can see in the works of, as we can see in the works of Kushan Singh and Bijam Sani, a continuous process of filtration is happening here in the documentation of historical incidents. But no one was aware of what happened to the refugees long after partition. These kind of narratives are conveniently neglected from mainstream historical documents. But today, many books and articles are being published on the issues of the refugees. Let Manoranjan Babari's Interrogating My Chandal Life be an inspiration for those who wish to create autobiographical expression as a source of truth, and let the critical studies in life narratives promote autobiography as a source of historical investigation. So that's where I conclude the part. If you're looking at other autobiographies like Bama's curriculum, we have a clearly different picture regarding the conversion of Dalits into Christianity. Bama talks in length about what happens or how the Dalit converted like Christians are being treated, even in the church, how Dalit converted Christians are treated, even, after being educated, even after getting a better social status, how they are treated as second-class citizens in the church. So again, this is actually kind of a valid historical document that talks about issues like, partition or maybe conversion. So this is where Dalit autobiographies to a better standpoint regarding alternative histories, how they create alternative histories. Okay, let's move on to the third part, the translatability or the untranslatability of Dalit life writings. This is actually a very important area that I would like to put forward, because when we look at Dalit autobiographies, let's say we have, I have worked on Dalit autobiographies from South India, from Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Telangana, and in all these autobiographies, we have regional specificities. We have if you're looking at Malayalam Dalit writings, we have the communist elements. Pokudan talks in length about the influence, and the problematics of the communist influence in his life. And we can see, surprisingly, in the autobiographies from Telangana, we can see the communist influence, but it's different. Here we have the Naxalite influence, but not the communist influence. So what I'm trying to say is, when we talk about regional specificities in Dalit literature, we normally talk about Dalit literature as a common platform, but it's not Dalit literature actually, it's Dalit literatures. The Dalit literature in Tamil Nadu is, the background, the social and the economic or the cultural factors that influence the Dalit literature in Tamil Nadu is entirely different from that from Kerala, even though we are neighboring states. So we have actually the Paraya literature, we have actually the Kaikadi literature, we have the Mahar literature, we have the Pulaya literature. we have the Muli literature, we have the Chora literature, but we have this, the common umbrella term, like by which we call them Dalit literature as such, which is actually problematic in the contemporary scenario because it's not common. It's not Dalit literature as such. It's actually Dalit literature. It has different parameters. It has different features. For example, if you are looking at, say, the poetry that are being created in Kerala and in, say, Telugu at the same time period, the kind of spirit that we have in these writings are different. The way in which they approach towards the oppression, the suppression, it's different. It is more or less interesting at this particular context. So that's one thing that I would like to say. The differences that we have regarding, say, the literary paradigms from which they emerge. And secondly, the language employed. The language, when we talk about translation, there is always a kind of standardization that happens. Be it Tamil, the autobiography, or like Malayalam, there is a kind of standardization. That means, the Nyan or Nyanga in Malayalam, when it is being translated into English, it's I. But it has its cultural significance in the native tongue, native language. Okay? I will be reading out from the paper here. Yeah. So I'll be referring three main autobiographies here in this context, in the context of translatability or the mediation that the writers employ. Veerama, A Life of a Dalit by Veerama and Enda Jeevitham by Pokkudan. Both of them are narrated autobiographies. They are oral autobiographies or what we say mediated autobiographies. Here the life narrative is formed out of the fruitful interaction between the subject of the narrative and the one who records it. The subject is actually the autobiographer, or let's call them the testimonialist. Okay. However, the basic element that favors the wrong autobiography is taken into question here. That is, the subject of the story must be the author. In autobiography, the subject of the story must be the author. The question is whether the testimonialist or the subject with limited literary skills can still be the author of this life narrative. The traumatic and the historical and social episodes that he or she seeks to narrate to the intellectual, which is then transcribed, need to be analyzed both from linguistic and literary as well as social epistemological perspectives. Thus, the modes of mediation employed in the oral autobiographies are really significant. When we have oral autobiographies, we have the testimonial is explaining his life story and an educated intellectual writing it down. So what is actually the mediation that happens between the two? And this is actually significant in the translation context because when we look at translation, for example, the autobiography by Bama. Bama has written her autobiography in Tamil. It's Karuk, it's titled Karuk, and when she wrote her autobiography, she wrote her particular autobiography in Paraya Tamil, not the mainstream Tamil. She wrote her autobiography in Paraya Tamil. For instance, the Tamil Bama, she came up with her first book, Karuk, where she consciously and deliberately chose her own language over the so-called standard Tamil. She used the Paraya Tamil basically because she did this to undermine the hegemony of the standard Tamil. That means writing in the Paraya Tamil itself is an act of resistance from her part. She's kind of revolting against the hegemony of the mainstream, the so-called standard Tamil. So this particular aspect of her resistance is in her language. That means writing in Paraya Tamil is a part of resistance. And what happens when this is being translated into English? Because this cultural element that we have in the language, that is being translated. So thus the cultural transmission also happens in the translation of these autobiographies. That's actually the question that I would like to pose here. That's actually the question of the translatability of Dalit autobiographies, because we are not translating the language of one particular autobiography. We are actually translating the culture embodied in that, the resistance embodied in that. So whether this happens, this effectively happens while translating these autobiographies is a question that I would like to pose here. Okay, let's move on to the paper. Yeah, Bama translated, Karikku by Bama was translated by Lakshmi Hallstrom, and she emphasizes the significance of the demand of the text, which Gayatri Spivak in her Outside in the Teaching Machine calls a surrender to the special call of the text. A surrender to the special call of the text. Because there was the language that Bama employed in her text, Karik, was actually the special call of the text, because it doesn't mean that, actually Bama was capable, Bama was well educated, and she was capable of using mainstream Tamil for her narrative. Her decision to use Paraya Tamil was a conscious decision, and thereby she challenges the hegemony of the mainstream Tamil literature. So when you write in a particular language as a part of the ideology that she tried to portray, that means the language employed itself is what she is trying to convey. Okay, so what happens when this language itself is being translated or kind of standardized? Okay, yeah. Here, Bama's narrative and language is concerned with raising an awareness of the Dalit experience. Her use of language itself is concerned with raising an awareness of the Dalit experience. There is a powerful sense of self and the community as Dalit, which rejects the outright notion of Varna and refuses to Sanskritize, to evaluate Dalit lifestyle according to the mainstream Hindu values. Her rejection of the mainstream Tamil language to record her lived experiences is part of this. It is an important narrative device that Bama used to connect with her community. Bama's conscious choice of spoken Dalit Tamil, ungoverned by the tyranny of elaborate grammatical rules as the medium to voice the story of a community, is indeed instructive. In spirit of defiance, it obviously challenges the authority of literacy over orality, a divide which was rectified and nourished by Tamil Selvism or Tamil nationalism of different hues, including mainstream Darwinism that during the century. And it is noteworthy that the translator had done justice to Bhama's approach to the language employed in the narrative. While translating the autobiography, Lakshmi Hallstrom has taken extraordinary attempts to avoid the issue of standardization that normally appears with translating Dalit life writings. The dialectical variations of the same word, when translated, becomes standardized. That's actually the example that I gave earlier, Nan, Nanga, or Numa. When it is translated into the same I in English, which conveys the same meaning, but are used in varied cultural context. I will just read out a part from, the introduction from the Malayalam Dalit autobiography, Ende Jeevitham by Pokkudai. In the Mugakuri, in the preface of this particular autobiography, it is written by Krishnadas, the managing editor. It is written like this, I quote, Malayalam atra nannai ezhudan ariyatha അസാധാരണക്കാരനായ ഒരു സാധാരണക്കാരൻ പഴയ നോട്ട് പുസ്തകത്തിൽ കുറിച്ചു വെച്ച ആത്മചരിത്ര കുറിപ്പുകളാണിവ. So here we have the writer, Malayalam atra nannai samsarikan ariyatha. It's part of his culture, the Tamil that he employs. The Malayalam that he employs in his autobiography is not the mainstream Malayalam that, which is used in our literary spheres. And writing in that particular Malayalam itself is a part of his identity, which will be really difficult to translate into English. When the Numa or the I that we have in Malayalam is being translated into English, does the cultural transcription through happens? No, that is actually the problematics of translation that I would like to put forward here. Okay, coming back to the paper. In the translation of Karku, Rashmi Holmstrom has employed a broken English, in quotes, broken English to narrate the life story of Bama, thereby justifying the original usage of the dialectical variation. Whether a text is translated, especially a life narrative, there will always be a threat of standardization that makes the narrative double voiced. That's why, initially when I said about oral autobiographies, will that be double voiced? The recorded autobiographies, the threat of them to be double voiced, the influence of the recorder or the ghostwriter, will that be catered? That's the question. Okay, this threat is even larger in the case of oral autobiographies like Veerama and Enda Jeevitham. If it's really interesting to note that Veerama's life narrative was initially published in French by José Racine in 1985, which was later translated into English by Will Hobson. So here we have the English translation of a French text, which was narrated in Tamil and recorded in French. The narrative is doubly moved from the original oral version. Racine, who was originally a Tamil woman, who came to Tamil Nadu in 1980s, she stayed with Veerama for 10 years. It took her 10 years to record the life story of Veerama. And then she published it in 1995 in Tamil. Veerama's narrative is peculiar for a lot of reasons. She narrated her life story in the Tamil used by the Parayar community. Being a folk singer herself, Veerama used the language in a very creative way, which is evident from Will Hobson's translation of the French version. It is interesting to note that the peculiarity of Veerama's Tamil still lingers in the doubly moved English version of Hobson. Hobson remarks in his translator's note, I quote, when Veerama pronounces, contracts, and alters words in distinctive ways, the upper caste who generally live in the earth consider her act as falling short of correct Tamil usage. Close quote. Here again, the language challenges the authority of literacy over orality. Unlike Bama, it is an unconscious process in the case of Veerama, or it could be considered as an unavoidable baggage of oral autobiographies. The mediation that happens here between the exchanges of the testimonialist and the ghostwriter is significant. The question, how far can the educated writer record the spirit of the language employed by the uneducated testimonialist? In the case of the Dalit oral narratives, the illiteracy in the part of the testimonialist is not a disadvantage, but a necessary advantage that conveys the rejection, revolt, and resistance embedded in the Dalit consciousness. It facilitates Veerama to exercise her freedom without any restraint. It is the duty of the ghostwriter to record the narrative without restraining the spirit of freedom in the narrative. The unconventional life narrative translated by Hobson stands as a good example for this spirit. Did I pass the time limit? Can somebody respond? Should I?
No, Vishnu, you can continue.
Okay, fine.
Take some more time.
Okay, yeah. The autobiography of Veerama is unconventional for a lot of reasons. It is self-assertive. Veerama's use of explicit language is a testimony to her self-assertion. She uses swear words and sexually explicit language throughout her narrative, which is translated by much labor by both the translators, by José Racine and Will Hobson. Most of the words are retained as Tamil words italicized, and others are swearing words that convey similar meanings in English. So there are a lot of words that are retained as italicized versions of Tamil. The significant factor here is Veerama's justification to her using the swear words is that the meaning of the word depends on the context in which they are used. It is part of a life and lifestyle. She is supposed to use these words in the context to which she is associated through her life. As being the supervisor of other contract She was actually the supervisor of the contract laborers of a landlord. And being the supervisor, she occasionally uses the same words as part of her job. This aspect of Veerama's language might be confusing to the ghostwriter and the translator, and it is questionable whether they have done justice to this aspect of language. Another dimension, another dimension for the use of Veerama's explicit language lies in the oppression and suppression that she faced for a long time. She has been forced to remain silent for a long time while facing all the forms of oppression such as caste, class, and gender. And being the subject of an autobiographical narrative is a chance to break this subject, break this silence. So when she got a chance to speak, she speaks to her heart's content. Speaking in a particular way, usually the self that we have here. Okay? So even Ende Jeevitham and Kandal Kadugal Kadayile Ende Jeevitham has this particular issue. If you are looking at the writings, I will just conclude with, say, one quote from Fokuden's autobiography. Say it was chapter 2. He's actually talking about different areas in his autobiographies. Chapter 2 is Parpadam. I quote, Idakiltara എന്ന സ്ഥലത്തെ ഒരു കുനിയിലാണ് എൻ്റെ ജനനം. കുനി എന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ വയലിൽ 4 ഭാഗത്തു നിന്നും മണ്ണ് കൂനിക്കെട്ടി ഉണ്ടാക്കിയ ഒരു ചെറിയ തറ. ആ കുനിയിലെ ഒരു ചാളയിലാണ് അമ്മ എന്നെ പ്രസവിച്ചിട്ടത്. ചുറ്റുപാടും വയലിനിടയിലേക്ക് തെങ്ങുകൾ. അത് മുതലാളിയുടേതാണ്. So this is how, close quote, this is how he explained, we have like titles like, chapter titles like Parpidam, Bhakshanam, Puram, Cholera, Pakshigal, Vithigal Thedi, Kandal Jeevitham. So, a lot of things are here. And all these things are explained in his language. The language itself conveys the culture in which he lives in. And that is part of the autobiography. We cannot take that away. And that makes it a real challenge to translate autobiographies like this. And this happens not with Malayalam autobiography, with all the autobiographies that we have. Does the cultural transmission happens with the transmission, like with the translation? Or what is it that is being lost in the standardization that happens when Dalit autobiographies are being translated? So that's actually the conclusion of my my paper. So basically, the problematics, I was trying to put forward the problematics of translating Dalit autobiographies and the mediation employed in oral autobiographies, and also how Dalit autobiographies are cultural, Dalit autobiographies are alternative histories. The historical data that we have, which was never before documented, are being represented through the autobiographies. Thank you. Thank you for listening, and I will be happy to answer a few questions if there are any.
Thank you, sir, for your scholarly talk on politics of Dalit life writing. And I particularly appreciate your views on the question of translatability or untranslatability of Dalit literary works. I feel there's a kind of, when the translations come out, it's of course it is the English translations that have given greater visibility to Dalit writers and to their writings, but I think it is a problem. Sometimes it happens that the translated version, the work in English becomes quite popular, and the original, the source text becomes ignored. And this is true with many Malayalam translations done to English. So again, there's a kind of hierarchy here, kind of a lead subaltern kind of situation. So, and also I've observed that most of the translators, they belong to the a different caste, even many of them belong to the high caste, and who have no access to the cultural world of Dalit's experience, and therefore, I think there's a kind of appropriation involved in translations. So I just, I mean, this is just an observation, and I'm happy if you also comment on this observation.
Thank you for that observation. Actually, I would like to comment on that observation. You said about the translators. Obviously there are a lot of translators who are not like from the same community, and their understanding about the experiences matters. This is really significant when we look at one of the most significant books that we have in Dalit literature, which is Towards an Aesthetic of Dalit Literature by Sharan Kumar Limbala. This is actually kind of the main critical text that we still have after 20 more than 25 years of publication, 35 years of publication. This is still the most significant book that we have in, say, Dalit literature, theoretical text that we have. Towards an Aesthetic of Dalit Literature. It is actually translated from Marathi by Alok Mukherjee. And Alok Mukherjee's translation, I read and understand Limbale's ideologies regarding Dalit literature through Alok Mukherjee. But I was really surprised or even shocked to know that when the original, my friend who could read the Hindi version, actually it was initially published in Marathi, and later it was translated to Hindi also. And the ideologies or the ideas that are being represented in the Hindi version seems to be a bit different from what I read and I understood. So here we have the question of translation. What Limbale really meant, that is really problematic actually. So this particular ideology is, I really like your question because, this observation is really relevant because when we look at translations, whether, what happens when Limbale's translation is being translated by Mukherjee. I'm not, limiting the quality of the text, but I'm talking about certain concepts being explained in a different light. And say, let's look at the writings that we had earlier in the initial time with Dalit characters, the fiction or the writings that we had. Before 1980, we had novels, we had plays, we had poetry with Dalit characters, but they were categorized as emotionalistic literature. They were not categorized as Dalit literature by critics, but emotionalistic literature. Say the writings by Mulkraj Anand. We have writings by Premchand. We have in Malayalam writings by Tagadi with prominent Dalit characters, Changambudas, Varakula. We have writings, but they were all considered as emotionalistic literature because, and later it was decided, it was pointed out by critics that the personal experience, the Dalit personal experience, is a significant factor to categorize them as Dalit literature. So this is actually not observed in translation because translation is more or less considered as an academic exercise. But in Dalit translation, this cultural aspect should also be taken care of. That's my take on that, my comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Your comments, really very interesting. All right, now the online platform is open for discussions. If you have questions, you can ask Vishnu sir, and you can make your observations. Okay, over to audience. We can have a few questions. For want of time, we cannot have a long interaction, but you can ask a few questions. There is one in the chat box. It is more of like an appreciation of your talk. So I just want to call your attention to that.
Okay. Yeah, it does offer a scope for further research. Truly, it does offer the linguistic features of translations, Dalit translation. And I would like to point out something also. I read actually the English version of Karikku, Bama's Karikku, and I read and I thought I understood what she's trying to convey. And I studied in Tamil Nadu for 2 years. My post graduation was in Tamil Nadu, and I could understand Tamil. So there was a point where I could listen to the audio version of the original Tamil autobiography by Bama, Karikku, and I was really shocked. And I was not surprised. I was shocked because I thought I understand Tamil, and then I realized, the version, the Paraya Tamil in which she has written this particular autobiography, it's incomprehensible for me. I couldn't understand that. So it's not even then. That's actually the point from where I got this observation, the problematics of the translation. When the Tamil, I thought I could understand other Tamil, but not this. So it was her intention, it was actually a conscious decision to write in her community Tamil. Because, if I am going to write my story, it will be in my language, not in a standardized language. So using her language itself is actually a part of, it's an act of resistance. And when it is being translated in English, and still, it is important to know that she allowed her work to be translated in English, and which is okay, because the greater idea here is all about awareness. That is one of the main objective of Dalit writing, to create awareness. Dalit literature is not about, say, the literariness of their expression. No, it's actually exposition of their expressions, of their lived experiences. So that is what matters. And Bama was okay with the translation because the language English, it gives new kind of, say, new paradigms to understand the Dalit experience from Tamil Nadu to others. That matters more. So that awareness is actually a very important factor, more than the cultural transmission. That's actually the conflict that we have when we study Dalit autobiographies in translation. I thought I should say that, comment on that. Yeah, it's actually an act of resistance as well. True. Okay, I think there are no more questions. Thank you very much for the patient listening.
Yes, any more questions? If you have any more questions, you can ask, or else we'll to move on to the paper presentation session. Is there any, there's one more question in the chat box. Or could you speak on Manohar Murli Biswas?
Hello?
So I think...
the Bengali writer. Hello?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I haven't read much on Manohar Murli Biswas. Actually, from Bengali, I was concentrating on the South Indian Dalit writing, but from Bengali, when I read, it happened, I happened to read the integration of my Chandal life, and I was really surprised because, I have worked on Marijapi massacre, Marijapi incident. I have read about that, and I haven't got any incidents related to Marijapi incident as much as I got from the life of a Chandal, interrogating my Chandal life. That's why, I moved on to Bengali Dalit literature.
Okay, I think that's all. Thank you, sir, for interacting with us. Now, we'll move on to the paper presentations.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Organizers, please.
Yes, sir. Okay, so now we are about to begin the paper presentations. The presentations will be chaired by Dr. Binu K. Devasi, and our presenters for today are Anjana Vijayan, Kartika Dinakaran, Anaka Arun, Saitya Shachi, Brinda Rajiv, Anuraka C.K., Ravina A.R., Dr. Saukajab Gosal, Bela Sipabi, and Abhirami Rajakumar. Before beginning, let me remember you that this time limit of each presentation will be 6 minutes. Now I invite Ms. Eneklit to call the participants for paper presentation.
So let us start the presentation. First of all, I call upon...
One second, Anjali. Before we begin the presentations, I have a few comments to make. Please, as it's already said, stick to your time limit. The maximum time is 6 minutes. You can even finish before that. So please confine to the time limit of maximum 6 minutes. And please don't read out your paper. Try to summarize your paper. And for want of time, I shall not be commenting on each paper. And I'll reserve my comments to the paper presentations only after we have presented all the papers. So, yes, that's all.
So our first presenter is Anjana Vijayan from Cochin College, Kochi, presenting on the title Treatment of Marginalized Women in Gloria Naylor, the Woman of Brewster Place.
Good evening, everyone. The topic I'm discussing about is treatment of marginalized women in Gloria Naylor's The Woman of Brewster Place. So Gloria Naylor is an African American writer, and she is known for her sensitive portrayal of African American women and the problems they faced. So it was her first novel, and it acts as a mouthpiece to portray the African American female experiences. And through this, we can examine the problems and double marginalization faced by Black lesbians in our society. And moreover, it also discusses about the topics like migration, gender discrimination, and homophobia. And this work deals with the life of 7 women who stays in the Brewster Place, which is a housing development in an unnamed city, and it seems destined to be an unfortunate place because the life history of Brewster Place comes to resemble the history of country as the community changes with each new historical shifts. So, following the civil rights era, Brewster Place inherits its last inhabitants, like African Americans, many of whom are migrants from the southern half of the United States. And Afro-American literature was developed during the late 18th century, and it explores the issues of freedom and equality and long denied to blacks in the United States, along with further themes such as an African American culture, racism, religion, slavery, and migration. African American writers tends to concentrate on topics important to Black individuals, like, for example, the part of African Americans inside the bigger American culture. So, The Woman of Brewster Place consists of the interrelated tales of 7 African American women who all ended up on a dead end street in a northern ghetto. The protagonist of the novel, Mattie Michael, has found disaster in just about every interaction she had with a man. So she got pregnant with a womanizer who seduced her, and her father, who cared for her so much in her childhood, the reaction
The reaction of him towards her pregnancy was violent, and her son, who she cared for, betrayed his mother. So, the most horrible incident that takes place in this work is that it takes place in the chapter named The Two, which tells the story of two lesbians named Teresa and Lorraine. They face discrimination not only from the patriarchal society but also from the matriarchal society. It shows the double marginalization faced by the Black lesbian community, and these two characters were afraid of facing society. So, because of that, they moved to Brewster Place. But there was no difference. So, the character named Teresa was a strong character, but the Lorraine was opposite. So, the another character in this work abused Lorraine publicly, and after that incident, people began to treat them vulgarly. So, after that incident, Lorraine was brutally gang raped by a group of homophobic men. The main reason for this incident was that she belonged to a queer community, and they become symbols of both of women's pain and women's unity by the end of this novel. This work not only talks about the problems faced by mankind through these female characters, but the judgmental society is more concerned about homosexuality without addressing abusive relationships and rapes and portrayed clearly. So, The Woman of the Brewster Place is a novel which captures the pain, suffering, and futile attempts at happiness for a group of colored women transplanted to a northern city's dead end street known as Brewster Place. The male characters in these novels are run for their responsibilities. These seven women in this novel fight to stay alive in a world that has never been kind to African Americans, or woman is a complement to African American female experience. Their atmosphere further causes complications in their lives, and these women were compelled to rely on each other when the world seems to shut them down. Despite their dissimilarities, the women of Brewster Place are bound by an intellect of community and sisterhood that facilitates them to deal with the everyday stress they face in the male dominant society in which they live. So I like to conclude that women are taught to be ashamed of our sexuality, and those of us who identify as lesbian, bisexual, or diverse can't say it because there is a great pressure on women regarding the obligations we have on society. So through this novel, The Woman of Brewster Place, I understood that if a stereotype has been given, it is relatively hard to change, but it is not impossible. But it will take over a long period of time to change our stereotypical concept about Black peoples. So please don't judge a person with their skin color, and don't avoid or restrict the rights of Black people or LGBT community, because we all live in a country without discrimination. Thank you.
Yes, before we go to the next presenter, I have a request to the paper presenters. Please, if you don't have the data problem and network issue, please keep your camera on while you present. So we can have the discussions later. Yes, next presenter.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Next, Kartika Dinagaran from Swami Next, Kartika Dinagaran from Swami Swastikanda College.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kartika Dhanagaran, and I'm from Swami Swastikananda College, Putota. So my presentation is on the movie JB. It is a movie by T.G. Gnanavel. So the title of the presentation is T.G. Gnanavel's JB in a Dalit perspective. T.B. Gnanavel is a director and writer who has worked mainly in the Tamil film industry. He made his debut in 2011 by writing the story of the movie Payanam. He made his directorial debut in 2017 with the movie Koottathil Oruthan. He is best known for directing the movie JB. So, JB is a movie starring Surya and Lijamol Jose in the pivotal roles. Lijamol Jose, as we know, is a Malayali actor. So, it was released in an online platform in 2021. It is a courtroom drama based on a real incident that happened in 1993. The story is inspired from the life of Justice K. Chandru. So, this is Justice K. Chandru. He is a retired Madras High Court judge. He was a human rights activist who mainly fought for the rights of Dalits. As a lawyer, he fought many human rights cases free of charge. As a judge, he took many bold decisions, including the availability of common burial grounds, regardless of caste. So the plot of the movie revolves around a man named Raja Kanna. He is from Irula tribe. He was falsely framed of a theft case and he is imprisoned. Later, he dies of custodial torture. The victim's wife, Sengani, comes to K. Chandru for help. Then, after a series of courtroom sessions and further investigation, justice is served to the victim's family. So, we know the Dalits are people who belong to the lower caste, lower sections of the society. The word Dalit comes from the Sanskrit word, and it means shattered. The people who were previously they were actually classified as untouchables. They belong to the lowest class of Hindu caste system. They were considered untouchables and were frequently abused. The Dalits were even denied basic human rights. They were not. They were prevented from using public wells and temples too. The main tribe that revolves around this film is the Irula tribe. So they belong to the Dravidian family and are found in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Karnataka. They are good. They are experts in traditional herbal medicine, and they also excel at catching snakes, even venomous ones. Before, this tribe was only seen in the mountainous areas. Now they are seen in the rural areas too. Then we can analyze this movie in a Dalit perspective. From the beginning of the movie, the situation of the marginalized is clearly shown. In the first scene, when the prisoners are taken out, the people belong to the upper strata of the society are set free, whereas the people who belong to the lower class are falsely accused of crimes and are again imprisoned. This one scene is enough to depict the condition of the society at that time. These are scenes from the movie. In the movie, the law enforcer's duty is to treat every human beings fairly and justly. But here, they treat the tribals inhumanly and as mere outcasts. The government officers to behave unjustly. The women belonging to the irregular tribe were also treated inhumanely. There is no proof to prove that they even existed. They are exempted from getting voters' ID or any other forms of legal documents that prove their existence. They were denied education and acquisition of land. This is the ending of the movie JB. The movie is actually a realistic portrayal of the condition of the Dalits at that time. The film JB shows how the other communities had exploited the Dalit community. The last scene of the film is an ending that suggests hope. It suggests better standards of living for the minorities through education. So as I conclude, I firmly believe that education or literacy is a key towards their upliftment. So this is the end of my seminar presentation. Thank you all.
The next presenter, please.
Thank you, Kartika. Next is Anaga Arun from Cochin College, Kochi, presenting a paper on the title Involvement of Women in Various Dalit Struggles since the early 20th century.
So good afternoon, everyone. Today I am discussing about involvement of women in various Dalit struggles in the early 20th century on We Also Made History, Women in Ambedkar Movement. It is the very first book detailing the history of women's qualified participation in the Dalit movement in India, led by B.R. Ambedkar. The book is written by Urmila Pawar and Meenakshi Moon in Marathi and was published in 1989, and the translation was done by Vandana Sonalkar in 2008. As we know, the book is divided into two sections. The first is a historical analysis of the participation and role of women in the Ambedkar movement and the previous Dalit struggles in the 20th century. And the second section of the book comprises interviews and biographies of 45 Dalit women. And these women include Ramabai Ambedkar, Dr. Ambedkar's first wife, Sulojana Bai Dongre, the chair of the Women's Conference founding of All India Scheduled Caste Federation in 1942, and Saku Bai, who was elected president of All Indian Buddhist Women Association in 1956. So here I am trying to focus on the life of Dalit women and their involvement in the Ambedkar movement through these characters of Urmila Pawar and Meenakshi. First is about the wrestler Shandabai Sarude. And she is saying how she became a wrestler. Her father had an akhada. In the afternoon, we put the little one to the bed at our with a bit of onion and went there to do sit-ups. In the morning, my father would be exercising in the akhada. We would hide outside and watch him through the window. Then we copied his actions. We got down into the red sand and had wrestling. One day, a brother saw her and told her father. Father said appreciately, if they had a taste for it, let them learn. They'll become strong and tough. From her childhood, she was bold, headstrong, free-spirited, and hardy. She set her mind to learning it all, and her body became strong. She began to wrestle against men, and thus she became a wrestler. And then she is saying about her after marriage issues with her husband and his family, how they treated her. She has faced many caste discrimination at a young age itself, and she is mentioning some of them. An incident. There was a different stones down at the village from Kunbi women to wash clothes and different one for the Mahas. She purposely washed her clothes on the Kumbi stone, and four of them came running in a trice and had a big fight. And later she heard about Ambedkar and began to be a part of his activities. And she had been in prison for 18 times for the sake of Dalits. And she says she will never forget her debt for him. And next comes Sulojana Bai Dongre. When she was in the 8th class, she was married to Dasidev. After her marriage, she indicated to her father-in-law that she wished to study further. Then she completed her schooling and decided to enter college. At that time, she worked as superintendent of the different class girl. While managing the hostel, she gave guides to several driving to get an education. Since her husband and father are both involved in Ambedkar movement, she developed an interest in social work and began to give speeches on occasions and made an impression on audience. She was asked to chair a women's conference of the All India Scheduled Caste Federation in 1942. She gave an inspiration speech in front of 25,000 women assembled from different parts of the country. Later, she was invited by Ambedkar to deliver her speeches in Maharashtra. Here, her life is an example of how Dalit women killed them silent and helpless articulate enabled to hold large audiences with their speeches. And she was completely dedicated to her work and she didn't even care about her health. She had contributed herself for the life of Dalit people. And the next person involved in the movement was Ramabai Ambedkar. She was married to Ambedkar when probably she was a child. The burden of running home fell on her shoulders after the death of her father. She was a close witness of Ambedkar's life. She understood the importance of his work and duties, and she took too much of burden working as his partner in order to uplift the untouchable caste. She always helped him. Here we can see the religious interest in women at that time. She was a religious person and practiced enhance and fast to bring success to her husband's work. She even fasted every Monday. She identified herself with his husband's activities. Among the activists, she led the role of a mother in her heart and contributed her fullest for the Dalit people. There were several other women who involved and participated in the movement. Some sacrificed their life and some other contributed themselves to give untouchable people a better life. And throughout the book, we can see the feminist side, how upper caste women treated lower caste women, how they led their married life, their religious concepts, etc. And when we go through the concluding section, Here we can see the involvement and contribution of women that they had been in the Ambedkar movement. And after going through the second part, we can see we came to know the real struggle that each woman faced during the time and about their life incidents. Pawar and Moon portrayed that the after marriage struggles, caste discrimination, Dalit feminism, etc. through these books.
Anaka, please summarize your paper in 30 seconds.
Yes, sir. These papers bear testimony both to the large number of women who participated in the movement and to initiate and individualize women. And from this metric of statistics and description, the authors give us a picture of the neglected, underrated women activists of the Ambedkarite movement. The primary archive for their work, however, lies in the memories and voice of women. Thank you.
Yes, next, please.
Saitya Shaji from Department of English and Research Center, Newman College, Sodura, presenting on the topic Dalit Literature and Analysis of Prison Vibro and the Weed of My Life at Dalit Women Writing.
Yes, who is next?
I think she's not in the meeting, sir.
Okay, then go
So we
on to the
can
next
move to
person.
the next one. Next is Vrinda Rajiv from St. Philomena's College, Mysore, presenting on the topic Marginal Representations and Identity Quest in the Weave of My Life.
Good evening, all. My topic is marginal representation and identity quest in the weaves of my life. So, in Indian Dalit literature, which can be drawn back to a corpus of writing from Maharashtra in the 1916s, referred to literature of the oppressed, usually associated with the diverse group of people historically considered the lowest among the Indian population and known as untouchables. The Dalit literature is the representation of Dalit reality. Through this representation, the untouchables eloquent strictly across the caste ridden and that destroy the boasted purity of upper class. The primary aim of Dalit literature is the liberation of Dalits. Dalit women's writing began issues of caste attitude to feminist literature. So, in the autobiography, Urmila Pawar is an Indian writer and activist. She is a prominent figure in the Dalit and feminist movement in India, and her works, which are written in Marathi language, have often been heard and critique of social discrimination and Savarna exploitation by commanders and media outlets. The Weave of My Life, a Dalit woman's memoir, Urmila Pawar's an expression from the local dialect spoken in the village of Maharashtra, forms the background of her life. Weaving has various metaphorical significance. Weaving of cane baskets was a vital livelihood of the women of Konkan region in Maharashtra from where the author hails. The arrows of Dalit alertness of selfhood may be traced to the Marathi literature of 1917s in India. Urmila Pawar's The Weave of My Life began the genre of autobiography which is rarely practiced by the Indians as compared to that of poetry and fiction. It is problematized the major issues of class, caste, and gender in the Indian context. It highlights the dual oppression or double marginalization of Dalit women on the basis of caste and gender. Apart from this, the woman's citing of selfhood and structure of her identity through her struggle with poverty, caste barriers, and patriarchy. One of the significant aspects of the text is the narrator's protest in various ways against the gender bias in the society. In her personal life, also, she had to fight against the male of her husband who wanted to see her in the traditional role of a woman, always attending upon her husband and children inside the four walls of the household. In the autobiography, the representation of humiliation, like other autobiographies, in the Weave of My Life, the issue of untouchability occupy an important place. Power explicitly uh, focus on the ridiculous and the violent in the practice of untouchability. The upper caste people considered it on selling to be touched by the Mahar. So the priest who has called to come to the Mahar Vada to perform worship and the rituals of marriage could climb a tree at the fringe of Mahar locality from where he could perform his task. The condition of the rural Dalit woman is the practice of Dalit woman was really too pathetic. They had to manage all the internal calls and at the same time went to work for their kinship. The subversion is often used as a tool of identity formation, just as the Dalit writers often pursue to hypothesize the discrete identity in the deconstruction approach to certain Hindu myths. Like the Dronacharya and Ekalavya, many of them also attempt to form their identity in positive terms by subverting the accepted connotation of certain cultural symbols of the Dalit. To give a concrete example, pig is generally associated with dirt and slut, and the Dalit keeping of pigs in the house makes them utterly filthy and hence untouchable in the eyes of upper caste people. But certain Dalit writers subtly uh, undermine the negative connotation of the pig by attributing to it new connotation in positive terms and thus redefining their own identity also positive and assertive terms. Thus, abusing the rebellion potential of certain cultural symbols of Dalits, the Dalits writers seek to give a positive and self-assertive dimension to their own identity in plain distinction into the negative dimension of their identity based on negative connotation of the Dalit cultural symbols. So I want to conclude my presentation. Ormlapava, the weave of my life is also constituted of a series of events. The book is a kind of Eden, as its title specifies, made by the weaving of several events in the day-to-day lives of the Dalit women of the Mahar community of Maharashtra. One meaning of the book is not just a personal life story, but more importantly, it provides a space for the representation of the daily grief and corruptions of the Dalit woman by both their own men and the society at large, and acts as a weapon, an instrument to raise a voice of protest against such injustice, making the Dalit woman aware of exploitation and subordination in every field of life, empowering them with a sense of their self respect, self confidence, and solidarity among them, and thus helping to grow in them a sense of their distinct identity as Dalit women based on their unique subject position. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Next is Anugraha CK from the Department of English, Newman College, Todupura, presenting on the topic Unraveling the Dalit Reality in Perumal Murugan's Season of the Palm. I think she's not in the meeting. So let me call Ravina Aya from Ilahia College of Arts and Science, Perkapalli, presenting on paper on Article 15.
Good evening, all. I am going to discuss about Dalit identity in the movie Article 15, and my paper is titled as Casteist Article 15. Dalit is a name for people belonging to the lowest caste in India, which were characterized as untouchable. The use of them and the social disabilities associated with it were declared illegal in the constitution adopted by the Constituent Assembly of India in 1949. The term Dalit later came to be used, especially by political active members, though that too occasionally has negative connotation. Caste has been an integral part of the Hindu social culture and ritualistic structure. Indian society is divided into caste hierarchies, which more often than not manifest in everyday lives. Hindi cinema is one of the most popular sources of entertainment in India, and henceforth it also reflects upon socio-cultural practices, discourses, and sensibility at large. This paper focuses into representation of caste question and the representation of Dalit in the movie Article 15. It argues that Dalit have been stereotypically represented in lines with the dominant culture. They have been represented stereotypically as meek, shabby, and unconfident individuals. Article 15 is a 2019 Indian Hindi language crime thriller movie directed and produced by Anubhav Sinha, who co-wrote the screenplay with Gaurav Solanki. The film stars Ayushmann Karuna as a police detective who investigates the disappearance of three girls from a small village, uncovering a history caste-based operation along the way. The film is named after Article 15 of the Constitution of India, which prohibits discrimination on the ground of religion, race, caste, sex, or birthplace. While not based on specific event, the film is inspired by multiple real-life cases involving crimes driven by caste-based discrimination, including 2014's Bandwan gang rape allegation and 2016 Una flogging incident. Through this film, Brahmin is trying to uplift the helpless Dalit. Dalit men are seen tied to a jeep and flogged in a street, and then there is a sight of a bare-bodied man emerging from the sewer. These are a few instances where Dalit are seen in piteous sight, but the audience is never allowed to enter into the subjectivity of the sufferer. There are a large number of Dalit characters in the film. However, only three Dalit characters have substantial dialogue. Jedwaji, a local constable, is a Dalit. He has been risen from the social ranking and has internalized the Savarna gaze. He is the first person to be caused about the family of the girls, and he learns acknowledge the oppression of his community. Then we can see him being slapped by his upper caste colleague and willfully withdrawing a foot so that he doesn't share it with his upper caste superior in performance of caste rebellion. These scenes depict how socially caste oppression has been penetrated, even with the government office. Nishad, who is the leader of Dalit Sena, an educated man who attempts to bring the oppressed ones together, but his boss brings the upper class to shoot him down. The movie portrays two minor Dalit girls hanging dead on a tree with an addition of a third girl, Pooja, who is not dead but missing. The movie gives us hope, but the gender and caste imbalance come together when we hear about the rebellious demand to increase the girls' wages by 3, but never in their own voices. The only Dalit female voice in the movie is that of Gaura, sister of the missing girl. Another representation of teen girl Amli, house help of Iron's home. A comparison can be drawn between Amli and Pooja. Although the movie resolved around investigation of case where 3 Dalit girls are involved, but there is no female police constable in the film. Dr. Maldi, who stands up for the truth of despite continuous warning, is nowhere to be found later in the movie. I like to conclude that the Dalit characterization with specific scene in the context of earlier Hindi movie, which portrayed Dalit in the same light of Article 15. How the figure of Brahminic hero is shaped how the Dalit protest continued to be silenced, and lastly in the section of gender and violence with caste. Article 15 among a handful of Hindi movies to open a platform to discuss and question with systematic oppression. With over 100 years of Hindi cinemas, the number of films in which Dalit plays a central role is very less in comparison to a hero. Even with the limited portrayal and screen time, Dalit characters are objectified and subjected by the Brahmin patrons. And that's all about my paper, and thank you.
Thank you, Ravina. I request the presenters to kindly switch on their cameras while presenting their paper. Next is Dr. Karja Ghoshal, Assistant Professor of English, Government Gasol College, Mizoram, presenting the paper with the topic Explaining the Elements of Protest and Resistance in Hansa Sovendra, Shagars, The Adivasi Will Not Dance, and Baby Campbell's The Presents We Broke, a Critical Analysis.
Good afternoon to all of you, and it's actually my privilege that I have got an opportunity to present my paper at an intellectual summit. It's actually my second visit to the place called Kochi. My first visit actually was a physical presentation at Amrita Viswavidyalaya in 2018. And this was actually a kind of virtual presentation. But anyway, it's actually, I'm very much happy and privileged that I have got an opportunity to present the paper. I will try to wind up my paper within 6 to 7 minutes. Maximum, it may take 8 minutes. So I request the chairperson to grant me the time to wind up my paper. All right. So the outline of the presentation is actually, first I'll be talking about the objective of the paper. I would like to know whether my slides are visible to all of you. Am I audible? And my slide visible to all of you? My slide visible to all of you?
No, sir. We can see only a white screen.
Okay, all right, sir. Let me just check. Let me just check, sir. Might be a technical glitch.
Take your time.
Yes. Is it visible now, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please continue.
Okay. All right, sir. Thank you. So the outline of the presentation will be, first I'll be talking about the objective of the paper. Then I'll be talking about the methodology I have applied for my paper. Then the literature review. Then why I have chosen Shekhar and Baby Kamble for my study. Then other primary texts which I have consulted for my study. Then I will be defining the ideas of protest, resistance, and post-colonialism. And then I'll be talking about the Dalit and subalternity. Then I'll be integrating marginality. Then I'll be analyzing the texts. And then I'll be coming to the conclusion. Then I will be giving an idea about the further thought and further scope of research. The objectives of the paper as per Bloom's taxonomy to understand the nature of marginalization in Hasda, Saubhendra Shekhar, and Baby Kamble, to theorize the triple ostracization of Dalit women as depicted by Kamble, to explain the ideas of protest and resistance, to make the readers or the audience rather, since it's a virtual platform, then I can call it as an audience. And if I'm writing the paper, then it will be like the readers to understand the comparative aspect of male and female narratives. As you know, Shekhar is a male and Kamble is a female. So these are the primary texts I have chosen. These are the authors. Now the methodology I have applied is actually post-colonial critical paradigm operating under the parameters of gender and subalternity. The study of the research is actually a kind of inductive research, and the conclusion is drawn based on the critical study of the text. And it is also an example of an empirical research where an argument is established after an empirical analysis of the text. Now the reviews of literature, I have made some literature reviews to identify the research gap. For example, Women Writing in India, the 20th Century by Sushi Tharu, Dalit Literature and Criticism by Rajkumar, Writing Cost, Writing Gender by Sharmila Rege, Narrative from the Margin by Samjukta Dasgupta, and Caste Matters by Suraj Yange. Now, why I have chosen Shekhar and Kamble, leaving other writers? Shekhar and Kamble have been chosen for analysis to understand the attitudinal and representational differences of marginalization, because Shekhar is a male and the latter a female. In spite of the difference in a caste-based society, the nature of marginalization remains the same for both a Dalit and an Adivasi. But the Adivasis actually were not treated as impure by the surrounding Dravidian populations, Dravidian culture, but the Dalits are treated as impure and untouchable. There is a chronological difference. Jina Amucha, which is actually the original Marathi title of Baby Kamble's The Prisms We Broke, was published in 1986. And the original English translation by Maya Pandit was published in 2009. And Adivasi Will Not Dance was published in 2015. So there is a huge temporal and chronological gap. Yet the struggle for autonomy and marginalization continues even for the Dalit and for the Adivasis. There is a difference, let me quote, between the Adivasis and the Dalit. Adivasis and their struggle are different from the Dalit struggle because unlike the Dalit, Adivasis were concentrated, just a second, in contiguous areas and could demand state of their own. Other primary texts which I have consulted for my analysis of subalternity and marginality and all that, Bama, Sangati and Karuku, autobiographies by a Tamil Dalit woman. In fact, I have written a paper on Sangati in 2013. Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things, where a Dalit man Velutas ostracization and the subsequent masculine oppression, and he was sexually exploited by Ammu, an upper caste woman. Then Mahasada Devi's Choli Ke Piche and Draupadi. In Choli Ke Piche, actually, the photograph of the nude breast of an Adivasi woman was published. And after that, the body of a woman actually was objectified. And in Draupadi, Dopti Majan, the Adivasi character, actually was brutally raped. And she died a horrible death in the end of the story. Then Nirmala Putul actually is an Adivasi writer, female writer. Her poem, The Mountain Woman, narrating the hardship of a Santal woman. Then I have referred to Bengali Dalit writer Monohar Mouli Biswas's book, A Rose of Revolt, where there is a poem dedicated to Fulan Devi, a Dalit woman who was raped, as all of you know. And also another writer, Monoranjan Bapar, is, I think, already Professor Vishnu has referred to him. I'm not going to explain him. Integrating my Chandal life and autobiography of a Dalit. Now, what are the protest, resistance, and post-colonialism? Cultural protest and resistance are intertwined. While protest precedes resistance, resistance is what follows protest. Resistance is an act to oppose an unwelcome force. For critics like Barbara Harlow and Edward Said, resistance is a counteraction, which is basically cultural, to oppose the ravages of imperialism. Let me quote from, Culture and Imperialism, an excellent book by Said. In fact, it's one of the most popular books after Orientalism. That there are two types of, resistance. One is primary and the other one is ideological. Said looks upon resistance as a part of the process of decolonization. Then we have the subalternity and Dalit. Now, these are the oft-quoted ideas. I'm not going to explain much because the entire session is actually dedicated to Dalit narrative. So most of the speakers have, explained the terms Dalit and all that. So you are already familiar with this. I'm not just going to explain everything. Just I would like to explain a little bit ideas on that. Both of these terms have cultural and socio-political implication because both of them refer to a group of people occupying a marginalized space in the society, deprived of the authority and power. Now, the term Dalit is actually a very recent coinage because it came to be very popular after the, establishment of the Dalit Panther by Namdev Dhasal in 1970s. Now, let me quote Padma Valaskar. Caste is, I quote, specific type of feudal organization, and castes are economic and political grouping with the distinguishing essence of being status groups founded on distinction of purity. Now, what do you know by marginality? Peter Leonard defines marginality because you are talking about marginality, marginal narratives. What is a marginality?
Excuse me, sir. Sorry for the interference. Instead of explaining these concepts, could you move on to the argumentative part of your paper?
Okay. Yes.
So for want of time.
Yes, sir, I'll do it. So yes, sir. I'll just move on to another couple of slides. Then I'll conclude, sir. Yes. So Peter Leonard defines marginality as outside the productive mainstream society and social reproductive activity, and we have the different occurrence of marginalization in the society at the individual level and at the community level. For example, a disabled child as an individual may feel secluded in a school, but a Dalit or an Adivasi is actually as a community marginalized as a whole. Now the textual analysis of Sekhars, the first paragraph of the story, November is the month of marginalization, described the never-ending poverty of the Santal people. And there is another story of a girl, Talamai Kisku, who actually, sell her body to an RPF Jovan for a piece of food, a piece of bread. This is highlighting the inhuman condition of the Adivasi community. Then the title of this story, book, The Adivasi Will Not Dance, is a mode of cultural protest. Let me quote from the story. The last story, actually, the book is a collection of 10 stories. The Adivasis will not dance anymore. Someone presses our own button and we start beating the rhythm. And the first story, they eat meat. Here, food is an agent or a metaphor to ostracize or marginalize a Santal community. Now, let me come to the analysis of Baby Kambli. Baby Kambli is actually a Dalit life writing. Now, what is a Dalit life writing already has been explained by Professor Vishnu. So, I'm just quoting a couple of lines from the text. For example, Baby Kambli was a victim of domestic violence. So, as a Dalit woman, she is triply marginalized because of her gender, class, and caste. So this is actually the thing. Now, let me come to the conclusion. Sekhars, The Adivasi Will Not Dance, offers a deep insight into the Adivasi consciousness, which makes the educated look at the cultural and material condition of the Adivasis. Hasda, through a powerful narrative, has attempted to build an Adivasi consciousness. The text constructed Kambli's identity, or the Mahar identity. Here by her I refer to Kambli, as a unified identity of a Dalit. And the condition of a lower caste woman is worse, because apart from the caste discrimination, they are the victim of gender discrimination. Now, do all Dalit works act as a crusade against the upper caste society? I have some ideas to give. No, we are saying that Dalit writings are mostly a kind of resistance or a protest against the upper caste hegemony. But yet, there are writers like Om Prakash Valmiki, who is actually the writer of Jutan, who has acknowledged that one Brahmin boy saved him when he was in school from being tortured. So it's not like that all Dalit people have a kind of grudge towards the Brahminical hegemony or Brahminical people. That is one exception we have in Om Prakash Valmiki. Then, in the second thought we have, by turning the table, the Dalit people in the present day context are resisting against the oppression faced in the hand of the upper caste people. For example, I refer to one article, excellent article published in Economic and Political Weekly by S. Anandi and others, Work Caste and Competing Masculinity, note from a Tamil village. Here, she is describing how in Chengalpattu village, the Dalit men who are sexually exploited by upper caste women are now, extending by taunting the upper caste women of the village. The third point which I want to refer to is how by becoming or by embracing the politics, the Dalit people are getting their autonomy. For example, Bengali Dalit writer turned politician Manoranjan Bepari, belonging to the lower caste, is now elected as an MLA in West Bengal and he's one of the prominent faces of Dalit revolution, and he's gaining autonomy as a Dalit. Now, you can refer to the article which was published in Gestor, Dalit Revolution, New Politicians in Uttar Pradesh, written by Craig Jeffrey et al. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Next presenter, please.
Next is Bella C. Baby. Assistant Professor, Department of English from Nirmala Arts and Science College, Mulamtiruthi. Title of the paper is The Marginal Self and Beyond the Margin, a psychoanalytic reading of the select Dalit autobiographies.
Good evening, everyone. So, my paper is titled The Marginal Self and Beyond the Margin, a psychoanalytic reading of the select Dalit's autobiography. So, as you all know, life writing is a self-referential text in which the author progressively unfolds the course of his or her own life. And the autobiographies belong to the upper caste elites, always had a wide audience to accept it. Even the upper caste woman's autobiography too had a wider acceptance. But a Dalit's choice, dreams, desires, and needs are highly conditioned by the upper caste society. So, with writing the autobiography is the most appropriate way to present a truthful representation of the Dalit. So, it is this that paved the way for the establishment of Dalit autobiography. So, the desire to become like an upper caste man or the desire to get an education are the two opposite drives that are developed within the Dalit people at the same time. So, these two concepts of desire that is hidden behind the conscious self remains as of the psychoanalytical concerns of the desire of the unconscious self. So the aim of this paper is to portray how the formation of Dalit identity is different in Dalit man's and Dalit woman's autobiography. So Dalit man means the marginal self and the beyond the margin, which is Dalit woman's autobiography. So I have selected two autobiographies. One is The Scar by a Tamil Dalit writer, K. Gunashegaran, and the other one is the Prison We Brought by a Marathi Dalit woman writer, Baby Campbell. So, and how these Lacan's mirror stage, how the psychoanalytic theory Lacan's mirror stage defines the ideology behind the identity construction in both of these autobiographies. So, as you all know, psychoanalytical criticism explores the language of the unconscious, of the repressed and the hidden. So, this critical move to explore the human psyche by exploring the deeper hidden meanings of text and their characters is one of the features of the psychoanalytical criticism. So, the conscious self projects only the kind of image that is socially and culturally acceptable. So, that is the reason why this lower caste people always obeys the upper caste people. So, the society never allows the lower caste to question the upper caste norms, and it is not acceptable in the society. So, expression of this desires is only possible in the unconscious mind, and only a few have expressed their unconscious desires and experiences through their writings. Okay, so first focusing on the autobiography, The Scar. So The Scar is an autobiography by K. Gunashegaran, is the first modern Dalit autobiography in Tamil, and it is a story of his home village called Elankudi, and he grew up in Elankudi. So Elankudi is a place where there is no caste oppression and people were treated with love and care. So even Dalit women have got education in this particular village called Elankudi. So what I want to tell you about that, but the people outside the Elankudi never had any knowledge and education to question the domination. They failed to master over their conflicts that confronts in their life. So this stops their complete growth as a person with an identity. So village outside and inside of Elankudi shows up the possibility of an easy establishment of Dalit identity in a village. There is no caste. Okay. So most of the Dalit people always, focusing on the theory of Lacan, we can see that there are two types of people within the, I have already mentioned, there are two types of identity or people we can see in the Dalit society. One, people always wanted to become like the upper caste men. Another wanted to become other wanted to follow the Dalit identity by accepting education. So Lacan's notion of mirror stage describes the process of misrecognition of identity that happens in the life of a child. The child wrongly identifies itself as the image in the mirror. So according to the child, the image in the mirror is a stable identity that can help the child to move away from a sense of loss and absence. So the other, with the capital O, is the center of the system that governs the whole structure. So the center remains as an impossible reality for the people, and this creates a desire in them to be acknowledged as the other, with the capital O, in order to escape from the various oppressions. So I quote from Lacan, nothing can be in the center with the other, even though everything in the system wants to be. So the position of the other creates and sustains a never-ending lack, which is called desire, and desire is the desire to be the other with the capital O. I unquote. So Lacan's
theory of identity through mirror stage works perfectly in the villages outside Elenkudi. As Elenkudi doesn't have any caste hierarchy, the people are free to express their Dalit identity, and they can have education, and the women are free to express their identity. So according to Lacan, there is always a center called the other or the phallus or the desire. So there are it sets a symbolic order before the people, and in order to escape from that, they urge to become the other, or the other here means the upper caste man. Okay, so the center is highly built by the notions of caste oppression and patriarchy. So with the help of the power, they have occupied the center. So they consider the people outside the center as the other with small o. Okay. So in the slums outside the village of Elenkudi, there is an upper caste master in every house. So I have already told that Elenkudi is a place where there is no caste oppression. So in outside the Elenkudi, we can say there are so many people who obeys before the upper caste man just for a single acceptance. So there are upper caste master in every house, and they are very much obliged towards them, and they call the upper caste man by the word called Ayya. So these kinds of practices are from the side of a lower caste men to get the acceptance in the society, or in order to approach the center. So wherever the people of Elenkudi had to go outside, they will be asked of their caste and things like that. So, but most of the villages outside Elenkudi perform the caste hierarchy, so they cannot express their Dalit identity in the society, and they may have to face a long chain of expression by revealing their identity. So they have to live a life of absence and loss and identity as separated from their center. So approaching the center or living with the center is the only thing that was possible for the people living outside the Elenkudi. Okay, and we can see that there was a Shiva temple in Elenkudi, and people, the lower caste people, were not allowed to enter the temple. But the thing is that they were also followed the evil practices that were followed by the upper caste men. It was only to gain acceptance in the society, or they wanted to get an acceptance like the upper caste man. Okay, and
Please summarize your paper in 1 minute.
Okay, sir. So, and about the what you call Baby Campbell's paper, Prison Rebirth, we can see that it is a society where every woman is treated in a wrong manner. It is not a matter in like that of the Dalit man's autobiography named K. Gunashekhar Scar. So, in the case of Marathi writer Baby Campbell, every people followed various kinds of superstitions, like they were possessed of the evil spirits in order to get the acceptance from the Dalit society or the center. So, if they get possessed of any kinds of spirit, the people will bow before them, and they will accept these women as a god or things like that. So, all these kinds of superstitions are a mere kind of practice followed by them in order to get an acceptance in the society. So, the only solutions for the sufferings of the Dalits is to equip them with enough knowledge, support, and resources to stand up for themselves. So this would certainly change the scenario from the self-emulation to self-affirmation. How an independent creation of Dalit identity is possible only in a society where there is no caste oppression. That is the main thing I want to focus on this paper. As there is no time, I could not talk about more on this topic. It's an elaborated topic. So I just wanted to conclude this paper by a quote by Om Prakash Valmiki. I quote, Dalit writers should write the Dalit autobiographies so that not only our history will stay alive, but also our portrayals of the wrongdoers. Dalit autobiography will provide inspiration to our future generations, I unquote. Dalit autobiographies alone can make it a truthful representation of the Dalits. The psychoanalytical reading of the Dalit autobiography helps us to find deep desires that can be hidden behind their conscious self. Thank you.
Thank you, Bella ma'am. Next, this is going to be the last presentation, and it's handled by Abhirami Rajagopal from St. Mary's College, Manarkad. Title of the paper is Dalit Life Literature.
Good evening, all respected dignitaries and dear students. We have been listening to various topics on Dalit discourses, reflections on marginal lives, and narratives. So I'm going to discuss about Dalit life literature and how it is represented in Indian literature. And this paper also throws light on to Dalit life represented in the writings of Dalits and non-Dalits and how it differs. In India, caste caste became prominent in between 500 BC to 500 BC and AD 500. The idea of caste system is synonym with idea of India. There are more than 250 million Dalits are being marginalized, humiliated, and ostracized for centuries. Dalits' bold step for challenging the upper caste hegemony in India was geared up by the introduction of Dalit literature, we should say. As we all know, Dalits were deprived of their fundamental rights like education and possession, and also the right to live. As a response to this marginalization, Dalit literature emerged as the voice for all those who are exploited and voiceless. In the context of Indian literature, Dalit literature is the least narrated topic because, like Dalits, Dalit literature is also marginalized. Yet, it have a prominent place in Indian literature. Dalit literature explores the experiences of Dalits and it is written by Dalits. So they write about themselves, their agonies, their pains, struggles, needs, etc. And Dalit life writings make a new idea like a narration of the lives of Dalits. But it can be by Dalits and also by non-Dalits. Both Dalits and non-Dalits can write about the former, but the problem lies in the way of representation. Only a Dalit writer could express his pain, agonies, marginalization, and exploitations because it is the life they lead. As Benjamin said in Adu Jeevitham, all the lives we never experience are just myths to us. So, one cannot portray the struggles of Dalits unless he or she is a Dalit. Non-Dalit writers like Rabindranath Tagore, Anand, Girish Karnad, Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, etc. has been wrote about Dalits in their works, but all these works does not discuss the utmost exploitation or suppression that Dalits have faced. So there lies the difference. They cannot explain things as it is. And misrepresentation of Dalits are also common in the works of non-Dalit writers. Even in the stories of upper caste people, Dalits are portrayed as villains, thieves, murderers, etc. Even writers and filmmakers of other castes attribute certain characteristics to Dalits, mostly in a negative way. Even though the story does not demand a thief, the writer will place a Dalit in the story and will make him a thief. So, that's it. A Bengali Dalit writer, Manoranjan Vyapari, have been pointed out the misrepresentation of Dalits in Indian literature in a recent interview. In an interview, he asked that how can you go on writing about Dalits if your perception of them hasn't changed? So it is a relevant question. Non-Dalits view Dalits as their slaves and marginal people even after 74 years of independence. Whether in literature or in cinema, we find that Dalit characters have almost never been center stage, even in stories about caste oppression. Whether a Dalit character is portrayed as a victim or a fighter is a matter of politics and the socio-political reality of the storytelling. When a marginalized protagonist story is developed and shaped by a privileged upper-class writer from a position of oppressive power and with no understanding of the Dalit struggle, it is like standing at the seashore and predicting the depth of the sea. So I conclude my words by mentioning the impact of utmost exploitation of Dalits cannot be portrayed by a non-Dalit writer completely. Dalit life literature became mere Dalit writing when it is written by non-Dalits, as the term itself suggests the life will be missed from it. So, non-Dalits can't much of Dalits in telling their stories, as for the latter, it is their life, their blood, sweat, and tear. Thank you.
So I think the paper presentations are over. Are there any more presentations?
No, sir.
Okay, it's already very late. So I think I shouldn't take much time. So I'm not going to make comments on individual presentations as such for want of time. one thing that I noticed is the growing interest in Dalit literature. So in a one-day seminar, I think the organizers told me that there were about 100 papers received, and this shows the growing interest in Dalit literature. And I was reminded of my experience more than 20 years back when I traveled to places like JNU, Hyderabad Central University, with a proposal to do my research on Dalit studies. None of the faculty members in English departments in the national reputed institutions, they were not willing to take me because I don't blame them, because at that time the literature hadn't become a veritable force as it has become today. And anyway, the growing interest in the literature is a welcome sign. I mean, sign of democratization of society. Well, first of all, I like to congratulate all the presenters. And one important point, one observation that I would like to make is almost all the presenters had good command over communication skills. That's very important in a paper presentation. Then, coming to my general observations on the paper presentations, most of the presentations were descriptive in nature. So, when you make a when you are planning to do a paper presentation, please keep in mind three important points, and that is you should have an argument. So your paper should contain an argument, and the analysis part of your paper is an attempt to substantiate your argument. So this argument was missing in many papers. So there's no point in stating the obvious. So you have to, the it's part of the research. To the attempt, the purpose of any writing of a research paper is constructing of new knowledge. So your paper should be an original response to the work that you have selected. So you should bring in your original insights into the text. So that was missing in many presentations. And the second part is the analysis part. And I already said that analysis is an attempt to substantiate your argument. Then there should also be a methodology. By methodology, I mean the tools of your analysis. Okay, these three things were missing in many papers, but of course there were outstanding papers. Some of the papers are commentable. Though I don't want to comment on individual papers, I think I shouldn't uh, go without mentioning at least two presentations. One by Saugarja Gosal, and that was, which involved a comparison of Shaker and Campbell's works. So he was trying to compare two marginalized sections, the Dalit and Adivasis, by selecting representative samples for both. And that was a very interesting study. And I think for want of time, he couldn't present his full paper. And another striking paper was one by Bella C. Devi. So she was trying to make a psychoanalytic reading of Dalit and Dalit womanist autobiographies, and that paper was also interesting for the novelty of methodology adopted. So a psychoanalytic reading of the Dalit masculine and Dalit feminine autobiographies. So especially using the insights of Jacques Lacan, his idea of mirror stage and things like that. And of course, I just want to make one more comment. When you select a paper for your presentation, please don't go for those old texts. Please select a book written at least in the last 10 or 15 years. So that's also very important. Of course, I know that the two presenters had selected recent books like J. Beam or Article 15. So whereas the most other presentations were based on books written several years back. The problem is, by the time you make your presentation, a lot of readings would have come out about those books. So always go for a recent work when you plan to present a paper. So though I want to speak about each work for want of time. I'm not trying that because we are already too late. And therefore, I would like to conclude by congratulating once again the paper presenters. And one important point is that, in spite of my request, you didn't turn on the camera. So I don't know whether it is a sign of your diffidence. So please try to overcome if that shows your diffidence. Okay, and thank you once again to the organizers for inviting me uh, to chair the sessions and chair the presentations. Thank you all of you, and have a wonderful evening. Bye.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable insights. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Shweta Chaji, Assistant Professor of Department of English of St. Albert's College Autonomous, who is also a member of the Organizing Committee of AKS 2022, to deliver the word of thanks.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Anila. Uh, we have come to the end of Albertian Knowledge Summit 2022. I'm so grateful and happy that we have had a wonderful day together where teachers, students, research scholars all have come together, have taught together, discussed together some of the most pertinent issues in the light of certain seminal text in Dalit Discourse. So let me express my heartfelt gratitude to everyone who supported us in conducting this webinar. Let me take this opportunity to thank the Registrar of St. Albert's College Autonomous, Reverend Father John Christopher, who has supported us in this endeavor. And he has willingly accepted our invitation to address the gathering during our morning session. I'm also indebted to Dr. Rajesh Kunan Pillai, the Dean of Research, St. Albert's College, for coordinating with us in the conduct of this event. Let me take this opportunity to thank Dr. Mary Sapna Peter Miranda, the head of the Department of English, St. Albert's College. She is also the convener of this particular summit. Dr. Sapna has always been a guiding light for us, and she has been giving us clear directives as to and today we were. I hope am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Dr. Ajay Shekhar was with us today from Sri Shankaracharya University, Kalari, and Mr. Vishnu Narayanan, Assistant Professor and Director of Center for English Language Teaching, Institute of English, University of Kerala. And on behalf of the Department of English, St. Albert's College, let me thank you, dear sirs, for sparing your valuable time for us and for inspiring us, all the students of our college, all the participants who have joined, those who have gathered here. And thank you for inspiring us towards active involvement in Dalit concerns. Your presentations were really lucid and inspiring. Thank you so much. I would like to thank Dr. Binu K. Devasi on behalf of the Department of English for sparing your time, sir, for staying with us this long, for chairing the main session and also the paper presentations. Dr. Binu K. Devasi, the Associate Professor at Government Law College, Thrissur, has been with us all throughout the session. Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable comments to the presentations as well. And Ms. Anne Placid, the head of the Department of English and Assistant Professor of Government College, Thrissur, has chaired one of our morning sessions. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your help and also your valuable comments that were given to the presenters. I would like to thank two of our own teachers, assistant professors from the Department of English, St. Albert's College, Professor Sebastian A.V. and Professor John Sinuj, for chairing one of our paper presentation sessions. Now, this summit would not have happened without the support and coordination of our participants and paper presenters. In fact, right from the day that we sent out the brochure, the call for papers, we were receiving an overwhelming response from students and teachers from across the country. So that was really a motivating factor for the organizing committee here. Thank you so much for your responses. And thank you for presenting such inspiring papers. And we would like to take this opportunity to appreciate the efforts made by the students. Several UG and PG students from various colleges have presented their papers, probably their first presentations. We wish you all the very best in your future studies and on your endeavors. Thank you so much on behalf of the organizing committee of Albertian Knowledge Summit 2022. And I would like to appreciate and thank the efforts of the organizing committee of Albertian Knowledge Summit 2022, Ms. Devika V. and Dr. E. Priscilla, teachers from the Department of English, St. Albert's College, for their wholehearted support and help in the conduct of this seminar. Let me also thank the student coordinators and volunteers of this summit, Ms. Anaglit Sarjan, Ms. Nandana Mathu, Ms. Najla Najib, Ms. Anila Maria, and Mr. Roman William Schmidt for your efficient organization and for leading these sessions. Thank you, dear students. And in one word, let me express my sincere thanks to the teachers of the Department of English, St. Albert's College, particularly Dr. Liz Mary Anthony and Mr. Anurag NT, for your efficient management of this particular summit. Once again, let me thank you all for joining us and for making this summit worthwhile for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. The feedback form for the submit is, the link for the feedback form is posted in the chat. I would like to request the participant to submit the feedback form and check it in the chat box. Now with this, we have come to the end of the Albertian Knowledge Summit 2022. May these sessions inspire each one of us to be active participants in recognizing and validating marginalized and stones around us. Once again, I would like to thank all of you for joining us, and I also thank the faculty and organizing committee for arranging such an enlightening session. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.